Hey everybody, just a quick reminder before we get the episode going that your support means a great deal to me. If you are able to support the channel financially, please do go to 10percenttrue.com, hit subscribe and pick one of the packages. For £5, $6.50 a month, you get early access and ad-free access to my content. And for a little bit more than even that, you also get access to AMA and private Q&A sessions that are run directly with my guests through Zoom call at least once a quarter, probably more often than that. I'd appreciate your support. Anyway, let's get on with the episode.
So at the risk of not being able to remember what I should be able to remember perfectly as a student of Clausewitz, but the paraphrased quote from Clausewitz is usually remembered along the lines of, war is nothing but an extension of politics. So in preparation for war, it is all about the extension of politics. So whether you reveal a project or not is often purely strategic messaging. So, and I think back to World War II, when we dropped the atomic bomb, strategic messaging to Japan was, how many more of these do you want? Because we got lots. We didn't have lots, but our strategic messaging was, we can do this all day. How many more of these do you want? So I think the decision to reveal or not is all based on what is the strategic messaging campaign at the moment, independent of what you actually can or cannot do. So the fact that the Chinese are parading around a bunch of airframes that look pretty Gucci from a camera angle from far, far away is a far cry different from, can they employ them in a combat scenario in a way that creates overwhelming force? So the question becomes, are they trying to pull a play out of our own playbook where in the Reagan era, we decided to win the Cold War by outspending and out-revealing the Russians what we could do until we ran our asses into the ground?
Yeah.
It's entirely possible that that's exactly the play that the Chinese are doing, is that we're going to show them everything and we're going to bankrupt those guys. And we got 1 billion people, and we're holding trillions of dollars of their debt. And I can pay these guys 10 cents an hour to bolt airplanes together that may or may not ever fly. And they're going to be playing catch up and run themselves in the ground trying. It's entirely possible that's what they're doing. And then every once in a while, we reveal something good. Dude, you think what you got is, well, look what I got. That you didn't even know was coming.
Greece, welcome back to 10% True.
Great to be back. It's been a long, hot summer.
It has. You sound, I mean, I should tell the audience at home that we are doing episode 5. So there are, by deduction, 4 other episodes. If you're picking this one up from scratch, you could go back and watch 4 other episodes where Greece has taken us on a fantastic journey from his time flying the F-111 in Desert Storm, all the way through to his time as a Strike Eagle fighter Wizzo, and then going through the test pilot school and then becoming a squadron commander at Edwards. We're gonna talk about what happened next in just a minute, but before I do that, Greece, let me just say to the audience at home, if you are listening to this and there are some adverts, you can make those go away. You can go to 10percenttrue.com, you can hit the subscribe button, and for £5, $6 or $7 a month, you can get early ad-free access to all my content. And one of the perks you get from that is that you also get to ask my guests questions through the AMA mechanism. And so before we launch into the continuation of Greece's story today, I'm going to put to Greece a question from Blair. Blair, I'm sure you are listening to this. I hope you are, because it's your question. You want to know the answer to it. But Blair, I wanted to say to you personally, thank you for supporting the channel. You've been a great supporter of the channel over the last few years. It means a great deal to me. And so thank you very much for doing that. Right, Greece, here is Blair's question. Let's try and do this. So Blair asks, he's thinking about the quick strike mine, thinking about LRASM, which is the long range air to surface missile. I think that's the correct definition of it. And in particular, he asks about the integration onto the Strike Eagle. So he says, how might the maritime strike tactics evolve for the Strike Eagle in a major power or near peer competitor type contest. He's thinking specifically around Indochina, Indo-PACOM. He's an Australian, an Aussie. And so that's his question to you. What do you think about that, Chris?
Yes, I think the biggest challenge would be just quantity. If I remember right, JASM was integrated on stations 2 and 8 on the Strike Eagle, and LRASM is a variant of JASM. So vice versa, JASM came first. So carrying 2 weapons on a Strike Eagle and the weapon has a very long range. I don't know the benefit of using a Strike Eagle in that scenario if you had bombers available. So in Indo-PACOM, I'd imagine where the biggest problem is what we call the tyranny of distance. Everything is far, far away. Logistics is a real problem. The SAM threat is a real problem. So if you got a weapon that can go, great distances, and you can carry lots of them on a bomber platform, that's probably, if I was in the planning cell, that's where I would focus my energy and task the bombers with that sort of weaponry. It would have to be some sort of constraint where I don't have bombers available, not with who's next in line, would I use a Strike Eagle? And again, there's almost no tactics with a weapon that can fly hundreds of miles. You decide where you want to launch it from, let it go, turn around, go back, get gas, do something else. So from a tactical point of view, it's a launch and leave. You don't support it. People talk about autonomy and drones. Well, that's kind of what that is. You don't actively steer it like a laser guided bomb or anything like that. So it's pre-programmed. It has its own seeker. So on the Strike Eagle, I would have to be down to my last few jets in the planning operation. Okay, what can I do with these guys? Oh, I can put a couple of Erasmus on them. I guess that's how I would answer that. But from a tactical perspective, there are almost no tactics with a weapon that has that kind of range. You pick some launch points that are out of the threat range that give the weapon the opportunity to get to where you think the ships are going to be. Send them there, give them gas, let them rip, turn around, come back, go do another mission.
Okay. I was just thinking of 2 other things while you were giving that answer. So one of the things we have, there's a 10% True Discord group. I don't know if you use Discord groups, but for people listening at home, if you were interested in coming to our Discord group, I'll put a link in the description. Join it. There's some good people, interesting people there, sharing things and discussing. One of the questions we had on the Discord forum just this week actually was the Navy or the Air Force came out with a press release about a new weapon. I don't remember what it is, and it doesn't really even matter. And they talked about it being a stand-in weapon. So standoff is what you describe outside the threat envelope, I suppose, or the missile engagement zone or whatever it is of the adversary. What is a stand-in weapon then?
It means it's short range. You're going to be in the threat ring when you release it.
Okay, so that's simple. Okay.
Yeah. So stand-in strike has its own family of requirements and constraints and desired effects, that sort of thing. So, and a lot of that has to do with employment off the F-35. Because if the definition of stand-in means that you are in the threat ring, well, that the ability of the adversary to see you now determines the size of that threat ring. So stand-in weapon for a B-52 is completely different than a stand-in weapon for an F-35.
Okay.
So most people think about stand-in weapons. They think of employment off the F-35. And you're probably looking at mid double digits of miles of range that you can let this weapon go in, and the F-35 weapons bay is relatively small, so you have some physical constraints on what the weapon can, how big the warhead can be, how big the seeker can be, if it's going to have wings or a motor or what kind of propulsion. So all the physical constraints of putting something in a relatively small weapons bay are the drivers in a stand-in weapon. In the standoff weapon, it's going to be external on a bomber or on the rotary on the bomber. So now you've got lots of miles and lots of room and all that. So that's kind of the dividing line. Stand-in is going to be small. It's going to be short range. The employment can't be so difficult that the guy has to hang around and stay in the threat ring until the missile comes off the rail at him and employ it. And you think a lot more about launch and leave kind of attributes in a stand-in weapon, whereas your standoff, if you had to fly it, and I think about the Ukrainian POV attacks on the Russian airfield. They were kind of standing in, but in reality, they were standing off. They were literally flying them all the way into the target, even though they were relatively close. Nobody knew that. So they were effectively standing off. They were outside the threat range of the guy guarding the base. They weren't physically threatened from where they're shooting them. So by definition, they were standoff. But those are the kinds you think about between stand in and standoff. And I'm not in that division. I'm in the weapons development directorate here at Eglin, but I'm not in the division that is doing the weapon that is literally called the stand-in attack weapon. So I just don't know much about that particular weapon, but I do know that it's in the realm of a short-range weapon that you got to get off the rail quickly, and that whoever's going to be releasing is going to be threatened while they're doing it, so you can't make it difficult to employ.
Very interesting. Okay. So
Like a harm. I mean, a harm is a stand-in attack weapon.
I think this weapon is based on the AGM-88, isn't that right? The advanced AGM-88 is based on the body of that. I mean, I really don't know enough about it. I saw this one thing on Discord, and so maybe I'm talking rubbish.
So I did the early in weapons development anthology of steps you have to go through to build a new weapon, and it's quite literally on the order of a decade if you follow all the steps. One of the first steps is called analysis of alternatives, AOA. And you look at the requirements that the warfighter wants to meet, and then you look at all the kinds of things it would take to pull it off. And you do a lot of math, and you do a lot of cost studies and cost comparisons and swap and cooling. It's a big comparison table. The product is a multi-page report that says, here's all the things you looked at, here's the scenarios you ran on the computers to figure out effectiveness and that sort of thing. Here's the modeling we've done. And of all that analysis, we think the best course of action is X. And I was on the team that did the AOA that was conceived to replace the harm.
Okay.
And so our analysis looked at things like, hey, do you modify the existing harm? Do you look at a variant of the Navy's ARGM, which was already a variant of the harm? The Navy was already working on ARGM ER. So we looked at a variant of ARGM ER, and our conclusion, and this was literally 10 years ago that we did this analysis, that a clean sheet weapon was the way to go. Because the constraints of the F-35 Bay means you weren't going to use a harm as a backbone. You weren't going to use an ARGM because ARGM started with harm. You sure weren't going to use ARGM ER because the motor's even bigger. So by the time you modify, and the Air Force didn't have any ARGMs, and the Air Force didn't have any ARGM ERs. So for the Air Force to modify an ARGM or modify an ARGM ER, we'd have to start with a Navy weapon to begin with that we didn't even have. So we said our analysis was punt, clean sheet design, design it within the constraints of the F-35 Bay, and make those your boundaries. So we sent it off to the warfighter, they did their thing, and as the requirements get firm, they write a requirements document, and all that gets done. Then they stand up a group whose mission is to conceive and develop and produce, test that weapon, and that's what the stand-in attack weapon team is doing. I have no clue what the current state do. Do they have prototypes? Do they drop some? I have no idea where they're at. But that organization was all about replacing the harm on the Air Force side.
Okay. Do you this is a complete aside. Were you familiar with the AIM 174? Obviously this is the world you live in. The Navy weapon, was that compartmentalized to the point where you weren't familiar with it in the Air Force?
Never heard of it.
No. Okay. Very interesting. So my second question was going to be around maritime striking and the Strike Eagle just generally. So one of the things that as a podcast host is difficult to do is have original questions. Your guest number 70, what are you, 74? No, you might even be higher than that. But so having original questions. But I think this is an original question. I don't think I've ever asked a Strike Eagle guy this, and I've never really even thought about it. But now the conversation has come up, I should ask you. Do you train? Did you train to the maritime mission? What does that training entail? I interviewed a guy called Rolf Stunkel, who was a German starfighter pilot who then flew the maritime version of the maritime for the maritime force, flew the Tornado IDS. And one of the things he said was that, the last thing you want to go up against is a boat. They're very, very difficult to take out for obvious reasons. So in your experience, how much time did you spend training against maritime? How difficult is that mission? What are your thoughts on it?
So you can tell me as I go through that if you want to go all the way, fast forward from day one to whatever day it was we actually worked on the Quick Strike project. But at Lakenheath, we actually joined. We did exercises with the British forces on maritime strike missions, and the German pilot is 100% right. It is the worst mission on the planet. You can't hide. In fourth gen, you're visible from the ship, and if you don't really study maritime warfare, it may not be obvious to you that there are no ships out there by themselves. Ships come in big numbers with lots of things that can shoot at you and that can find you and that can see you and make your life miserable. And by the way, there is no place for you to hide. So you will be seen, you will be detected. The only thing that is easy about ship warfare from the air is it's very easy to find them if you know where to look. There are very few stealthy ships. The ones that are not stealthy are so reflective, you can see them probably farther out than anything else. And the reflectivity of the water is essentially zero. So detecting the ship is the absolute easy part. Living through that is the hard part. And at the time when I was at Lakenheath, we had no standoff weapons. Everything we had was gravity drop. So you're going to get within 5 miles to 10 miles of the ship when you let your weapon go. And the weapon from the Strike Eagle that we used, the Navy may have had, I forgot the name of there's some surface to ship missiles that are in the Persian Gulf. I forgot what they were called.
Like Harpoon?
The Harpoon, things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the Iranians have some on the coast that everybody's afraid of.
Yeah, yeah, I know what you mean. I've forgotten as well. Yeah.
But they're sea skimmers and they're all, yeah. So the Navy may have airborne versions of those that they intend to use in a counter maritime, but Air Force doesn't have any of those. So at the time I was training, we were going to drop Blue 109 laser guided bombs on ships.
Wow.
So for medium altitude, you're well inside of 5 miles. Penetrator and PACAF actually did what we called sink X's. They would haul a ship out to the middle Pacific and you would just let it rip and it's undefended. So it was just a target and you just kept putting 2,000 pounds into it until it would sink. And you'd be shocked at how many 2,000 pounders it takes to get a ship to sink. It's right. Dozens and dozens and dozens because it's so compartment. I mean, a ship that's well run, super compartmentalized. They get a leak in one area, they close all the doors in that one. That compartment gets sealed. So taking out a ship is really, really hard, which is why torpedoes and mines are so much more effective because they don't try to penetrate the hull. They don't try to come in from the top. They remove the water that is supporting the ship's hull, physically remove the water, and it falls in on itself. So it breaks its own back. The original World War II torpedoes did try to, puncture the hull and that kind of thing, but modern ones don't do that. Modern anti-ship warfare, you get under the ship, you create a big explosion under the water that creates a bubble, and the ship is no longer supported, and it falls into the bubble and breaks. And
that's incredible.
Yeah,
I did not know that.
Oh yeah. So if you look, maybe if you want to do a short session on that. There's a public video out there from a colleague of mine that ran the last. It was an Air Force Research Laboratory project, so it wasn't a fielded weapon yet. So you can call it an experiment, for lack of a better term. But we put a boat out in the Gulf and a single weapon, and it just fell in. Put it in the right place and fell right down. And it's that project was a spin-off. It was a follow-on to the Quick Strike series that we did, and it was nicknamed Quick Sink.
Nice.
and one weapon, and the boat was done.
So you would use is that a penetrator then that goes through the boat and
No,
send? No.
no. So if you want to fast forward to the quick strike story, that might
Yeah,
be the way to do it.
let's do that. Yeah, we'll
All right,
cover maritime. We're not going
all right,
chronologically. We're missing out a whole
okay.
bit of your career out, but okay.
So this was quite literally my introduction to Starbaby. A great friend, a fantastic tactician, a wonderful aviator through and through, and about the most determined guy you'll ever meet. And so I was in the shop that we didn't have a formal name, but we called ourselves the weapons prototypers. So we had about a dozen folks, a couple engineers, a couple program managers, a couple of we had a loggy, we had a couple bomb experts, we had financial management, we had, we call it an integrated product team. We had everybody we needed, including a contracting officer, to execute weapons prototyping experiments. So the whole build it and they will come sort of environment where we show the warfighter, hey, if you bought this weapon, this is what you could do with it, as opposed to the warfighter coming to you and say, I need a weapon that'll do this. You flip it on its head and say, I have a weapon that'll do that. How could you use it? That kind of thing. And since I was a foreign weapons guy, I already knew how I would use it. So my projects were a bit more relevant than average. So at least I thought so. So Starbaby comes to me out of the Pentagon and says, the current counter-maritime strategy in the Navy was heavily reliant on the quick strike mine series if mining was going to be part of the campaign. Now, we haven't mined since, I think, Haipong. So it's been quite a long time since we physically mined someplace. But the technology that we had at the time, when I was working with Starbaby, reached back to that era. You had 500, 1,000, and 2,000 pound general purpose bombs that were released a few hundred feet off the water by bombers with a parachute. And the parachute would just let them fall into the water gently. And then they would have to fly kind of a pattern over wherever the area you're trying to mine, and then set them down and fly away. And in modern warfare, that's an entirely unsurvivable mission. You're not going to hang out in the enemy's harbor flying raster patterns at 500 feet and then leave. So we were trying to find a way to use the quick strike technology, which they replaced the conventional fusing mechanisms that we put on a regular general purpose bomb, and use maritime components. So there's a boat detector, there's a water detector, there's a conventional fuse, and there's a timer so that you can set it when you release the bomb. You can have it disable itself after a certain amount of time, so you don't have to go minesweeping yourself.
Grace, can I just interrupt you really quickly? Just explain, because I don't really understand how the quick strike works. So a mine traditionally, doesn't that sort of bob under the surface a little bit, and then so do these sit on the seabed?
They're on the bottom. Yep.
Okay.
So these are shallow water activities.
Okay.
100 feet or less, maybe. I'm not a mine guy, so I don't know the exact distance. Yeah, you're not going to put mines in the Marianas Trench and have any impact on anybody going over the top of them. So yeah, the World War II mines were the floating buoys.
Yeah.
But today, modern mines sit on the bottom.
Okay.
And they know when the boat comes across for various ways, and then that triggers them. So making this survivable, getting some kind of standoff was our experiment. What could we do? So the first part of that was the accuracy of where you place the mines with the parachute was lousy, because in that X hundred feet coming down on the bomber under the parachute, the wind carries them around. They get in the water. The parachute may or may not come off. If it's not a lake, it has some sort of current going through it. So the parachute is going to be a part of that equation and pull the mine around with the current until it hits the bottom. So you kind of don't really know where they ended up. So you got to put lots of them down. You don't really know where they end up. So if you want to clear the area later in peacetime, you got to send divers down to figure it out or something. I mean, it's really a tough mission. So the first attribute we're looking for is precision laydown instead of more or less random from a parachute. We wanted medium altitude versus a few hundred feet, so that the airplane wasn't immediately a threat on the harbor, and we want to stand off. So, how far away can we do these things? And all of those attributes became available with JDAM. So JDAM, you can pre-program the coordinates. So I want to go right there, and by the time we did this, JDAM was super mature. I don't know what the actual JDAM CEP is, but in a non-GPS jamming environment, it's going to go where you tell it to. You can do lots of them because JDAMs can go on the rotaries on the bombers, or you can hang them on the B-52. You can hang them on this thing called the heavy store adapter beam, which is basically a giant bomb rack you can hang on the on the wing of the airplane. You can hang, I don't know, X-15s, stuff like that. So you can hang anything you want on the outside of B-52. So volume is not an issue. So whatever you come up with, you can stick it on the B-52 for the experiment. So now we need standoff. Well, the Israelis had already designed and built a wing kit for the 2,000-pound bomb family, a glide wing kit. I don't know if they ever fielded it within their forces, but they worked with Boeing to build it, so it existed. We didn't have to invent a wing kit. We just had to go buy some. There was some difference. I may have it backwards. The Israeli version was built on the 109 bomb body, and we were going to use the 2,000-pound general purpose, or vice versa. I forget how it worked, but so we couldn't just take the Israeli one and use it as is. We had to work with Boeing, but a wing kit existed. You have to build the wing kit. There's one on the planet, so we used it. So it was a combination of using the JDAM tail kit, reprogramming the guidance package for JDAM to accommodate the glide portion of the delivery, making the batteries last a lot longer because now this got to glide for X amount of minutes versus maybe 1 minute time of flight from medium altitude. And then the first discovery we made was when the weapons come into the water via parachute. The impact's velocity is a couple hundred feet per second, maybe 300 feet per second. The nose part of the quick strike mine was conceived specifically for that. So the water pressure going through the nose and that was well understood. And there was a piece of that we learned along the way. If you were to have these quick strike mines on the deck of the ship, and the ship caught a big wave and it kind of tipped, and these things rolled off and fell into the water, the ship would not mine itself because the water pressure going through the nose of the weapon wasn't enough to arm it.
Okay.
So they would just be duds. But coming in at 300 or 400 feet per second on the parachute, that's plenty of water pressure to arm it. So the water detector was part of the arming sequence. So the difference when you headed off a JDAM, from medium altitude, a JDAM would hit the surface roughly 1,000 feet per second. So the first ones we sent out just totally flooded the water detector, just blew it apart. So it just totally malfunctioned. It was trashed. So we had to redesign the water detector to handle 1,000 feet per second impact velocities.
Wow.
And then we discovered that in a general purpose bomb where the nose fuse screws into the front, it's an open cavity from there into the weapon where the weapon fill is, where the explosive fill is. You better seal that really, really good when you have water coming in at 1,000 feet per second. You get a lot of water in your explosive fill, which we did. So we had to cherry pick out 2,000-pound bomb bodies out of the bomb dump that were not rusty, pristine, clean them, and seal the fuse, the nose mechanism, unusually well to make sure water didn't get into the explosive fill. So that was lesson number 2. Lesson number 3 was the behavior of the weapon once it hits the water is predictable with, you've probably heard of math models called CFD, computational fluid dynamics. There's a similar version of that for water, hydrodynamics. So the modelers told us, yeah, if you let these things hit the water the way they are going to go straight to the bottom and really not slow down. So you've got to figure out what that means to you. So we went to go figure that out, and we got a video back I think there was a Navy experiment early on where they abandoned using JDAM because of this reason. The video is I wish I could find it. It was fantastic. So it's in a lake, and they had a bunch of telephone poles that were going to in the lake that were the target. I want the bomb to go here, and of course JDAM did, and it goes in, and okay, JDAM did what it was supposed to do, and then what seems like 4 or 5 seconds later, you see the weapon coming out of the water, and it's banana shaped, it's bent and tumbling.
Wow.
And then it lands on the data link van on the range, and the picture goes blank. The only piece of equipment on the entire range this thing lands on. But what they determined was it went into the water crazy fast, straight to the bottom, got into the mud. The mud turned the weapon, had plenty of energy left at this point, so it came out of the water, but it was bent. So now, yeah, going straight to the bottom is bad. It was not going to give us the I put it on the bottom where I wanted it answer that we were looking for. So we tried to figure out how we would change that behavior once we got it into the water. And there were a bunch of crazy ideas floating around, but we settled on a solution that was quite literally tested in the Panarisi backyard weapons test facility, underwater test facility. So I have a big pool in my backyard, and we were trying different things. And I have these, I don't know if they're common in the UK, but in America, there's lots of little pool toys for the kids. And one of them looks a little bit like an American football. But it has a little stick on the end of it with some fins, so like a baby torpedo maybe.
Yeah.
And you could be on opposite ends of the pool, and you could play kind of underwater hockey and throw it, and it would go straight. It would had some mass to it, so you try to get it past the kid on the other side of the pool. So that was our game. So we knew that if we dropped this thing into our pool, it would go where we told it. So we put a little ramp on the side of my pool. And put this thing in the water and underwater camera, and sure enough, it goes straight to the bottom, bounced off the bottom, and okay, that's behaving just like the JDAM did. So how can we change this? And the guys that did the code said, if you can impart, this isn't the right term, but let's call it angle of attack. If you can get it to hit the water crooked, it'll behave completely differently, because when it hits the water, this analogy is completely wrong, but it might help. If you put a straw in a glass of water and you look at it from the side, the straw looks like it's displaced because the density of the water is different than the density of the air, so the light goes through it differently, and the straw looks funny. Same thing happens aerodynamically / hydrodynamically. The bomb is behaving a certain way in the air, hits the water, the density is completely different. It's going to follow completely different rules. So if you can get it to hit the water crooked, what the hydro code predicted was that it would essentially stall the weapon. And the water would literally boil around the front of the weapon because the pressure differences were so high, and it would shove the nose of the weapon up. It would basically stall, and then it would maple leaf down to the bottom. So they said, find a way to get the weapon to hit the water crooked, and you'll be fine. So I quite literally took a piece of rubber tube, taped it to the bottom of my little ramp, put the torpedo down the ramp with the camera, and when the torpedo hit the little rubber tube, it dislodged it off the ramp a little bit. So it hit the water at about a 10-degree angle. And no kidding, as soon as it hit the water, it swapped ends and settled to the bottom.
Wow.
So, we're not going to do this. Aha, eureka, we have the answer. So now how do you get the JDAM, which is programmed from day one to hit whatever it's hitting with no angle at all? Because the last thing you want is the weapon, especially on a penetrator weapon, to be a little bit crooked as it impacts, because you'll break the case open, you won't get the impact penetration you want, and that sort of thing. So we worked with the Boeing engineers and how we're going to do this, and it was going to be impossible. And one of the guys on the team had the eureka moment. And this is why when you have weapons experts on your team, you can really do some pretty cool things. And this guy was a total brainiac. The smartest weapons guy I've ever known in my life. He said, Greeks, this is no problem. tell the JDAM that the target is 5,000 feet underwater. I'm like, okay, why do you want to do that? He goes, because while the JDAM is en route, it's always correcting its position. At some time before impact, it says enough of that and streamlines its fins and it goes straight. So let's hit the water in the guidance mode, not in the streamline mode, and we're golden. And if we really care about the exact impact point, JDAM, you can program an impact angle. I want a 40-degree impact angle, whatever number you want. So we just do the math. If we want the weapon to be on the bottom at this point, then we do 40-degree impact angle, do the math, and we can program it to hit this point and tell it to hit this point on the ground, knowing it'll be this point on top of the water, all predictable. You can calculate it ahead of time. Off we go. So that became the answer. And sure enough, it worked like a champ. We did a few of them out in the Gulf, and the bombs just immediately upended themselves and settled down to the bottom. So we have the answer. So the final exercise was we took 8 weapons out to Guam, and we found an area in the Pacific that had like there's no baseball in Europe, but we would call it pitcher's mound in the base, so it wasn't very deep and easy to get to. And we took our B-52 out there, let all 8 of them go, and we put all of them in about 100-foot circle.
Really? Wow.
So it was
incredible,
wildly successful. And that whole process we funded under a Department of War project called a JCTD, a Joint Capability Technology Demonstration. So the DoD holds dollars aside for bright ideas that have joint application. And there's nothing more joint than the Air Force delivering Navy mines. So we got the dollars to do the experiment from the JCTD office. We took it from idea all the way through implementation, even to the point where the Navy office that buys the existing quick strike mines were on board with the new. They did the redesign of the water detector so that the pressure wasn't going to. They did the redesign of the ceiling so that the water wouldn't get into the bombs. They were our joint partners the entire way, and to the point where after our last demonstration of 8 weapons, they made the quote fielding decision, and now they're in the Navy fleet. And through that process, our team. Wow, right here. Even though I had that there, this was not a plant. This was the award from the Department of Defense for the JCTD of the year.
Wow.
So Starbaby put us on that path, and that was our solution. The quick strike ER mine. And we were so bummed when we were done that Air Combat Command didn't immediately jump on it and go, oh, we're going to use that for JDAM Glide. Didn't happen.
Why not?
Don't know. And to my knowledge, they still haven't done it. The Aussies have fielded the 500-pound Glide JDAM. It's been around for a long time. That was where we got the idea that you could do a Glide JDAM. But we just didn't want to do a 500-pound mine because that's good for 20 feet of water. So that project's done. My team gets disbanded, and it's a whole other story. But that engineer went back to the research lab and wanted to carry that mission forward because there was more to be done. Because we knew the behavior of the weapon going through the water was very predictable, and we knew that modern counter-maritime strategies were not hit the boat, but to create a vacuum under the ship for it to fall into, which is exactly what a mine does. Mine is under, it's well under it. It removes the water from around the ship, and the ship falls into it. So he said, let's get really close to the ship and do this. So he modified that weapon with a boat detector, just for the concept demonstration, just an optical sensor that you tell it, hey, the boat's about over there. You get a hammer. Okay, I see the boat, and now it self-steers towards the boat. And then you do math to say, I want to pick an angle. I want to get 100 feet under the boat. And so you do the math at this angle, 100 feet, Pythagorean theorem, whatever you want to do, and then you just put a timer on it. Hit the water, count 200 milliseconds, whatever number ends of it, and then go bang, and it'll be under the boat. And if you look up quick sync on Google, you'll see the 1-minute video of the final demonstration of the quick sync experiment. And sure enough, 2,000 pounder takes out a very large vessel. It hits, you see the splash somewhere to the side of the boat. A couple seconds later, you see the water start coming up under the boat, and the boat literally rises, falls, and goes to the bottom. The standoff is there already with, the long range wings that we got from the Israelis, so you can get, easy 50 miles of standoff. The seeker is trivial. It's an optical seeker. Like I said, boats don't hide. So you could do an infrared if you want to do it at night. They just did optical because it was cheap. The development is really converting the optical image into steering commands. Once you have that, the source of the image doesn't matter. It can be RF, it can be IR, it can be combination, doesn't matter. The hard part was taking, okay, the boat's over here in my image. How do I steer the weapon to get it in the middle? That's the algorithms that the seeker has to do. Once those algorithms are done, it doesn't matter what the source of that image is. So that'll be fielded, and that takes care of moving boats, because it'll steer towards, boats don't go that fast. So pick a number, 10, 20 knots. You're not going to outrun a weapon going 1,000 feet per second.
Yeah.
So that's now in the stages of, how do we get that into the fleet?
In the cat and mouse game then of, weapon, counter tactic, new weapon, another counter tactic, are you thinking about that when you design these kind of weapons? I mean, so the obvious thing that I would think is, well, so if you're in I don't know the nautical term, flotilla of boats, I don't know what it's called, a convoy of boats, whatever. You've got all these air defense systems. I think that what my understanding from the Russia-Ukraine conflict is the modern surface-to-air missiles can shoot down things like JDAMs. They have the ability to do that. Are you thinking, well, we would just overwhelm them by dumping dozens and dozens of these things out of the bottom of a B-52 as you describe? Or okay, so you don't have to really do anything fancy then. It's just numbers.
Let it rip. If you want to shoot your surface-to-air missile at my $50,000 glide weapon, have a nut. So ships are always doing what we call playing goalie. And they don't catch the weapon like a goalie does. They have to shoot the weapon before it gets to you.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I always commented on when we're talking about counter theater ballistic missile technologies or regional ballistic missiles or any kind of thing coming down from the sky, and you want to defend yourself against that, it's a losing proposition. Because you think about, I'm going to send a missile against that missile, and it's going to come from the ground. It's going to be relatively big, which means it will be easy to see. So the bad guy knows exactly how many you have. He just sends one more. So for the ship, if they want to shoot something at what I send them, have a nut. You're going to run out. You're going to on the Air Force, I would call it, you're going to be Winchester before you know it. And then what are you going to do? So playing goalie defense from a ship when you have very limited resupply options, defending that is really, really hard. So yeah, the offensive strategy is overwhelm the defenses. So
that's fascinating. Yeah, and good to hear a Starbaby story. Starbaby always says to me, "Oh, you should ask the people I introduced you to for a Starbaby story." Have you got any dirt on him? Got any Starbaby stories that would cause him to blush?
And I don't think so. He, because he was a reservist and he didn't wear uniform 24/7, and he wasn't stationed at Eglin with me. He would, pop in and out of our shop during our experiment to kind of lead the team a little bit and make sure the resources were right and that sort of thing. So I didn't fly with them. That's where the good dirt comes from when you fly with folks and you deploy and you go out in training range. So I really can't think of any good that would make making Starbaby blush that would be difficult to begin with. One of my favorite lines on one of your interviews with Starbaby was the last thing, because you were asking him about either somebody asked him or as part of the story, he goes, why wouldn't Starbaby have a drink? And not that he had anything against alcohol, but he just didn't drink. And he goes, somebody said the last thing we need a Starbaby with less inhibition. So I think it's going to be very difficult to find, no kidding, dirt on Starbaby because he was typically very well in control of his faculties. The guys that probably have dirt on him are probably the guys that worked with him on the light attack experiment.
On the light attack, okay. Yeah.
Because they were with him 24/7 for weeks out at Holloman.
Yeah.
Surely something came up during that period that would be worthy of a chuckle.
I have to get back to Hanky Cunningham. Was the guy that I spoke to who worked with him on that. So, okay, back to you, Grease. So,
okay,
we have skipped we fast forwarded in time by many years. So where we left off at part 4 was that you had taken the stewardship of the squadron at Edwards, and
yep.
you had then immediately been plucked out to the KAOC where you did your bit. And then I know you went to school and you did a non-flying role and a staff tour. I know you're not allowed to say the word staff tour in your lingo. I say it for you. So you did a staff tour.
S word.
But now you're back to Edwards, and it was curious. You when we talked, you did say that you had the first time you were at Edwards, you had these other peers and you were all being considered for command of a higher level unit, and you'd said, well, how many guys do you know who were wizards who made it? And Super was the guy we could look to, or you reminded me we could look to as somebody who managed to do that. But you did get picked up.
406, yes.
Yeah.
So I was on the staff, on the S word at UCOM headquarters, and my promotion board for the colonel met while I was there. It's very interesting when you're on those sort of detached operations. Stuttgart UCOM headquarters is not in the Air Force; it's in the Joint Command world. So your promotion recommendation has to be written by somebody in the Air Force chain, but isn't necessarily your wing commander or your group commander as you would normally see. Fortunately, the way the UCOM S-word was organized, we had an Air Force 2-star that was above my organization. So my organization was called a division. I was a branch chief in that division, so 1 notch below the division is a branch, and there were several divisions in the directorate of the UCOM headquarters, and they were in a bit of a merging, cut down, minimizing the number of people on S-word positions phase. So UCOM combined the J5 and the J8 leadership into one person, and that was a 2-star General Gration. So he was probably the main author of my promotion recommendation. It all goes behind the scenes. We don't ever see it. But 18 months into my 24-month assignment there, I was notified that the board had met. Congratulations, you've been promoted, and now you'd be looking for an assignment. So about 3 months later, General Gration called me. It was middle of an S-word meeting, and General Gration was playing I Have a Secret. And the meeting goes, oh, by the way, we have an announcement to make. Grease is going to go be a group commander out at Edwards. And I had no idea.
Wow.
I had absolutely no idea. The only thing I did along those lines was to be a group commander or a squadron commander in our time, you had to volunteer. That you said you would accept whatever command assignment you were offered. If it had a command word in front of it, you said, I volunteer, take whatever you send me. So I did that, but I didn't say I will, I want to be the group commander at Edwards. I just said I will accept group command. So that's where it turned out being at Edwards, which not too surprisingly, being from the test community, there's only a few places to send testers, but there are other group command opportunities that'll take anybody with a heartbeat. Doesn't matter what your background is. So the basic training course that when we bring new recruits in. There's colonels in charge of those organizations. That's group command level and then wing command level. That you're independent of your background, you could get that. Regional ROTC detachments are led by colonels.
Okay.
So I could have got that. That's a group command level thing. But anyway, I'm going back to Edwards. I couldn't be happier. I was ecstatic. Darling wife, not as ecstatic.
Why didn't she like Edwards?
She didn't dislike it. It was just not her favorite.
Okay.
Edwards is on an island, surrounded by dirt. From our house to the gate was 20 miles, and we lived on base. And then from the gate to the nearest town, which really isn't a town. I mean, I don't mean to besmirch Roseman, but it's probably between 10 and 20,000 people. So the closest quote town is Roseman, California, which is, right outside the gate, 13 miles outside the gate. You could literally run a marathon from the gate to Roseman and back. So, my daughter was born at Edwards. So from the time my wife went into labor to the time we got her through the threshold of the hospital was 45 minutes. So the isolation and the logistics of being out there is suboptimal. In the flying world, it's heaven. 360 flying days a year, crystal clear skies, great airspace, great mission. So flyers love it. Spouses, not all of them would not be the first choice for many spouses. And it was very difficult to live, quote, in town and then work at Edwards, because that's 45 minutes each way every day. And in command positions, they pretty much said, you're going to live on the base because you got to be available for whatever, you're the guy on the scene for aircraft accidents, all that kind of stuff. So group commanders go live on base. And I quite literally rode my bike to work. I mean, it was 3 or 4 miles from my house to the flight line. My building had a shower in it. So I got a lot of exercise back. I did 5,000 miles on my bike one year back and forth to work.
Wow.
So I'm going back to Edwards to be the group commander. I was elated. I kind of knew a little bit about the job, but it wasn't until you're in the job for a while that you really realize what you've gotten yourself into. A typical fighter base, a group commander has 3 squadrons under their command. At Laken Heath, there was a couple extra, but at Laken Heath, typical was 492nd, 493rd, 494th, the 3 squadrons. Because in F model days, F-111 days, the F model was unique to Laken Heath. Nobody came there knowing how to fly the F model. We had a 4th squadron that was a conversion squadron. So you spent X amount of time learning the F model. That was the 495th at the time. So there's 4 squadrons in that group. I had 12 squadrons in my group at Eglin, at Edwards when I got there. So the span of control was colossal. And not all the squadrons were at Edwards.
Okay.
So you had dislocated squadrons that you had to take care of as well. 2 of them were down in Palmdale. So in the test community, in the airframe test business, Edwards at the time, the Air Force more or less divided the test community into platform test was at Edwards, weapons test was at Eglin. It wasn't perfectly aligned that way, but that was the general sense. By the time I left Edwards, it migrated a bit to new airframe test was at Edwards, legacy airframe and weapon test was at Eglin. Okay. So by the time I left Edwards, the Strike Eagle had already moved to Eglin for flight test purposes, because it was a, quote, legacy airplane. F-16s were already there. A-10s were already there. The only legacy airplanes that remained at Edwards when I in my time there were the bombers, the B-2, the B-1, the B-52, because they had an entire complex on the other side of the base, and they weren't going to try to. There was nowhere else at Eglin, but they had that kind of real estate available. So we left the legacy bombers at Edwards, and we kept 1 small squadron of, quote, legacy F-16s. almost entirely because if you change flight control rules or you monkey with the motor, you want to be out at Edwards.
Yeah.
So we kept the group at Edwards for the F-16 test almost entirely for that reason alone. It's gone now. The F-16 test is here at Eglin, but when I left Edwards, it was still there. So I had, when I was a captain there, the F-15 squadron was its own squadron, the 445th. The F-16 squadron was its own squadron, the 416th. And there was a test support squadron down the ramp that did all the chase and photo chase and safety chase and conversion training and that kind of thing. When I came back as a group commander, the F-15 was gone. It was already moved out to Eglin as a legacy aircraft. The test support squadron took on a bigger role, and they actually had a reserve unit attached to them to do the tanker work primarily. So we had a reserve tanker unit attached to the test support squadron. So that was really cool. But the new guys were in town. So F-35 building was being renovated. The old F-15 test complex was being renovated to become the F-35 test complex. The building didn't have a leaky roof or anything, but the security requirements are completely different. So they had to recompartmentalize the building and put alarms on doors and all that kind of stuff. So, and the testing at the time for the F-35 was all being done at Fort Worth, with the exception of engine testing. So they would deploy the F-35 out to Edwards, do the engine testing over the top of the lake bed. So if you lose the motor, you come down, land on the lake bed, and then ship the airplane back to Fort Worth to do more testing for everything else. So sporadic F-35 testing while I was there. F-22 hot and heavy. F-22 was now 10-year-old airplane by that point. So they were well into the upgrades of the F-22 at that point. B1, B2, alive and well. Upgrades to the B1 and B2. Airborne laser was there when I was group commander. So you got a couple of 747s on the ramp. We stood up an entirely new squadron just for UAVs. So Predator came first, then Reaper, then Global Hawk. So those three were in that test squadron. I still had F-117s down in Palmdale. I still had U-2s down in Palmdale. I still had an airplane called Big Crow in Albuquerque. I think what else we had on the ramp. Oh, and we had a combined cargo test squadron. So C-17, C-5, C-141s, all in one group.
Wow.
And then we had a detachment in Arizona, in Tucson, that was in charge of the Air Guard F-16s. They weren't identical to the active duty ones. Block series, and the Air Guard had their own funding, so they could do their own upgrades differently. So we had a detached test outfit, people from Edwards detached to Arizona to run that test squadron. So huge organization, probably 1,000 people start to finish by the time you count all the maintainers and everything. Airplanes all over the place. Airplanes I knew nothing about in some ways. And fortunately, I had some just absolutely brilliant people assigned to the team before I got there. They were either, they overlapped when I got there, or they were brought in right before I got there. So I had phenomenal folks around me that just weren't going to let me fail. It just wasn't. It was not an option. So 2 years of that. Go ahead,
Bruce. What are you expected to do as group commander then? I mean, what are the key metrics? Is it to make sure that the tests go well? Is it to make sure that things go according to schedule? Is it to budget? What are you actually doing?
Yeah, so not much budgeting. I did have a financial manager, but we didn't do a lot of budgeting because oddly, the test community is operated in the Air Force in what we call the reimbursable activity. So the program offices at Wright Pat actually have the dollars, and then they quite literally rent the test community to execute the tests. So they pay us. So all the financial team does is make sure the dollars that we need are available and that sort of thing. So we didn't really budget per se, but if I hate the C word, the customer, if the customer said, "Hey, I got $10 million to run this test," You give them a test plan and say that this test plan we think is going to cost you about $9 million. Our financial team would make sure that we didn't exceed that, or if we got close, we had reasons for it and that sort of thing. There was a whole think of an attorney's office where there's billing going on for the work that the attorney's doing, their staff is doing. That's how we run it, you know. So you had to rent the range, you had to rent the airspace, you had to rent the data links, you had to rent the airplanes. The only thing you didn't rent was the air crew. We were, the military air crew were free.
So that explains a lot then, because I think the tape was rolling when we talked last time, when I'd said about lots of tests, and you'd said, well, no, they do the minimum amount of testing possible. And I don't think I'm out of line in saying this, but I got an email from Super saying what you said was exactly right. He's gonna come up back on the channel early next year to talk about test pilot school, because he's left test pilot school, and he will, I think, explain the reasons for that. But that makes perfect sense then. So they are having to buy that service from you. Okay.
And I don't think I coined this phrase. I said it all the time. It made no difference. Every time they talked about we need to save some money in the program office because for whatever reason, the first thing the program manager, who is not a tester, would do what kind of test can we cut out? And I kept saying, dude, test doesn't cost, it pays. Because the sooner you find something out, the easier it is to fix. If you've built 1,000 of them and they're in the bunkers in the field, and then you figure out something's broke, you got a real problem. If you only got 5 of them on the ramp at Edwards and you find something's wrong, it's really easy to fix. Yeah. So, completely biased position as a tester, I want to test the snot out of it so that when it gets to the field, it is near certainty it's going to work as advertised. They're never funded to near certainty. So the phrase I hated when I was in that organization and in that business, I'm in the business now. I absolutely hate the way people talk about it. It gets under my skin and just in my craw so badly. The people that make the decisions on the resourcing use this phrase so flippantly. We are going to accept risk in fill in the blank, which translates into we are going to spend less money on this so we can spend more money on that. Dude, you are not accepting any risk. In the programmatic training world, we talk about risk in different categories and what you can do about risk. You can avoid risk. Don't go there. If the wing falls off at 500 knots, stop at 400. You avoided the risk. You can mitigate the risk. The wing's going to fall off at 500 knots. I'll make the wing stronger. I've mitigated the risk. If you don't test something to, quote, save money and accept risk, you are not accepting the risk. You are transferring the risk to the guy in the cockpit who is now going to realize that risk sooner or later. Really bothersome to me that is the way of life in the program office / test community and that relationship between the two. The testers don't decide what gets tested. The program office does. We just execute it.
What typically then? I mean, can you give specific examples of where you saw that, where they gave that, and something you thought should be tested more wasn't tested more? Are there things that jump out to your mind?
Well, there's 2 parts to test. There's how do you resource the test activity itself, and then how many tests, what color, how many, how often, that kind of thing. So resourcing the test one, the best example I had was radar upgrade on the F-15. So at this time, as a captain, I planned and hosted the F-15 25th anniversary party at Edwards as a captain. So now I'm a colonel. The airplane is now pushing 40 years old. But there was a radar upgrade program going on while I was a captain.
This is APG-63V, whatever it was.
Fill in the blank. Yeah, one of the Vs. Yeah. And we told the SPO, hey, these airplanes are over 25 years old. You're talking hydraulic leaks, generator failures, actuators quit, engines don't start. Bad things happen on 25-year-old test airplanes. So you want it in the Program office, they only care about three things, and it's a total lie. They only care about one. But they're trained to care about three things: cost, schedule, performance. Those are the metrics that the program office is measured against and that they care about. Well, they don't really care about cost because no program manager is in a program long enough to matter. Somebody else will inherit his problems, so I'm going to burn the money I got. They don't really care about performance because they're not flying a jet. And if the warfighter said, I want to go through 6 feet of concrete and I can only go through 5 feet of concrete, he just doesn't understand physics. So it's really not about performance. It's all about schedule. Because if you're a program manager, the first question you're going to get is, why are you behind? Why didn't you do what you had to do to stay on schedule? Because days cost dollars. I don't remember the number exactly, so I'll exaggerate a bit. But the word on the street when F-22 was being tested at that time was that the cost of the F-22 test operation, if you put a bubble wrap around the entire thing, was close to $1 million a day. So if you lost a week in a schedule, that was not a trivial amount of money that went away. So it was all about schedule. So we're doing an APG upgrade. You had to modify the airplane to put this new radar in. And the testers are like, okay, what 2 jets are we going to do? And the SPO came back and said, no, we're only going to modify one. Because this is a prototype radar, I'm not going to buy 4 full sets of components, 2 to modify airplanes, 1 for the bench and 1 for a spare, on a prototype that I don't even know if I'm going to work or I'm even going to buy. So we only modified 1 jet. So there's one 25-year-old plus 25-plus-year-old airplane doing these test missions. And if the jet pops hydraulic line when you start it, you're done for the day. You could be done for the week. There goes your schedule, dude. But what actually happened in that program was we were pathfinding, and very successfully pathfinding, a fantastic partnership with the 422 up at Nellis. So it was very, very beneficial to get the operational test guys from the 422 into the developmental phase of a program to get the operators' eyeballs on it. Like, dude, this is how it's shaping up. What do you think? And since the airplane that we modified was a 2-seater, you could put the OT guy in the back seat, put the developmental tester in the front seat, fly the missions. They could say, hey, this should do this. We get really early. It was actually in the books called an early operational assessment. So we had a great partnership with 422 doing that. At some point, they said, hey, all the testing you're doing at Edwards is great, but we want to bring it up to Nellis and get it in the dense threat environment. So can we take your jet and bring it up to Nellis and do some flying at Nellis during your test program? We thought this was a great idea. We'll get data at Nellis that we'll never get anywhere else. Right to the point of midair the airplane. And we get to call back to the SPO and tell them, your only test jet is now scattered in pieces across the Nevada desert. How's your schedule looking now? So when we did a computer upgrade for the Strike Eagle, we did the first weapons computer upgrade. It was called PAX upgrade, Programmable Armament Control Set, I think is what PAX stood for. Replaced that 8086 vintage computer for I don't know, Power PC or something, whatever the chip was. We had 2 jets modified. And we had many missions where we go out to the first jet, crank it up, something wouldn't work. We walk across the ramp to the second one and on we went. Yeah. So we were able to convince that program office, spend a little money up front, you get scheduled back later. So as a group commander, the biggest thing I did was approve test plans to make sure that the risks that the air crew was taking on in that test plan was manageable, within their capabilities, within their training. And so there were, we called risk high, medium, low. And if it was low, the squadron commander could approve it. If it was medium, I could approve it. If it was high, then the 1-star base commander had to approve it. So managing those test plans, and there's 24 test plans going on simultaneously at any one time. Deconflicting support assets, making sure you need a photographer, you need this, you need that all that's deconflicted so that nobody's jumping on the same thing twice. Determining priorities, you can imagine what the priority was at the time. It was all about F-22. We literally called it Raptor alert. because the airplane, by the time I came back as group commander, the airplane's over 10 years old. The test airplanes were all the original airplanes, first four airplanes. So not terribly reliable. And they would soak up a lot of airspace and resources for chase and everything else. And they would own them until we're done with them. So it got to the point where on a Saturday mission, yes, we did Saturday missions. That's how important it was to get it done. We would call a phone number from our house at 6 in the morning, and it would say, Raptor mission, blah, 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 is Rolex plus 2 hours. And so we wouldn't go in and sit there waiting for, so setting priority was important. But I think the most important thing that I did that was not well understood outside those communities was help identify your replacement. Because there's
your personal replacement.
Yeah, because there's a dozen lieutenant colonels that were squadron commanders under me. There was nearly that many senior majors or about to be lieutenant colonels or select for lieutenant colonel but hadn't pinned on yet lieutenant colonels that were operations officers below them. So accession planning was a big part of it, to identify who's the next batch of leaders and why are they the right leaders versus somebody else, and running that filtering mechanism was really, really important. And to the folks out there on the Air Force side, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. You're going to say, what are you talking about, Grease? But to suggest somebody for promotion, recommend them for promotion, you fill out a form. It's called the PRF, Promotion Recommendation Form. And you summarize the history of that candidate in about 10 sentences. And then the very last thing you put on that recommendation is, of the candidates in this period, I would rank them number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 of whatever the denominator that you had span of control over. So I had 39 at one time.
Wow.
So my deputy and I spent an entire week locked in our conference room authoring these promotion recommendations and fighting over who should be number 2, who should be number 3, and going through all that and putting the right data that had to be in the records already. You had to pull data from, you couldn't make it up. This guy's the best guy. This guy won 10 shooting contests. If winning 10 shooting contests wasn't in his record, you couldn't say it. And in fact, everything you said about that officer, at the end of that line, you had to put in parentheses the document number, paragraph number, page number, line number that data was pulled from. And then you had to put that document in the folder, highlighted, and said, this is traced to line number 2 on the promotion plan. You had to document. So I flew with all the squadron commanders in various, I never flew with the F-22 guy in the F-22, obviously, but there was lots of F-16 chase sorties, and he was dual qualified, so I'd fly in the pit with him in the F-16 and get a feel for how he orchestrated test mission. As a squadron commander, you don't normally do that, but you're still responsible for it, so maybe you're a wingman. So seeing them in action was part of it. Seeing them in meetings was part of it. Seeing how going to their organizational events, seeing how they led that was all part of it. Speaking to their peers and was part of it. So that was a big part of the job, is figuring out who are you going to recommend to replace you. And I did okay, because the guy that replaced me became a 3-star.
Tell us, you did tease about this before. You've obviously, Starbaby talks about you in, I think I said this on tape before, in glowing terms. I mean, he's not really the kind of person, I don't think, to sort of blow hot air up someone's ass. So when he talks about you in glowing terms, I take that very seriously. But you did tease about this global hawk issue.
Oh yeah,
you said which was not a moment of glory for you. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Yeah. So this is probably textbook. What does a group commander do? And it will go down in the annal of history of exactly what a group commander should never do. So the environment at the time, Global Hawk was relatively new. We were deep into testing it. I'm gonna guess that the aircraft itself had already been fielded, but we were immediately upgrading it. So on that seminal day of my career, the test mission for that day was a new sensor in the nose of the Global Hawk. $40 million sensor. So not a cheap bit of kit, I think you would call it. I am in a meeting with the wing commander, and I selected the squadron commander in that organization. He was my guy. I picked him. So, and he was not a Global Hawk guy, just like I was not an F-16 guy, and I got F-16s. So nobody was a Global Hawk guy. So anyway, I picked him for his leadership acumen. He had the calm, cool, collective demeanor that is useful in many leadership environments. Some leadership environments, you need a candidate for asshole of the year. Some leadership environments, you need the hammer. Other ones, you need the wise old sage who sits back and says, back in my day, so in our leadership schools, we call it situational leadership. So in that organization, my conclusion was we needed the calm, cool, collective guy who is not going to get excited, knows when he walks in, he is not the expert in any of those airplanes because he's literally flown none of them. But he knows one of the great leadership lessons I took on one of my leadership courses was you're going to be put into a leadership position where it doesn't matter if you know the answer to the question. What matters is, do you know what question to ask of the people below you? So ask the right questions, don't have the right answers. And he was that kind of guy. So anyway, so I set him up big time. So he's in an airplane group he knows nothing about. He's completely reliant on the experts around him, as was I. And the airplane's up flying on test mission with this gajillion-dollar sensor. I didn't know at the time there was a known failure mode in the airplane. I was now about to learn about it. The airplane flies up in the bososphere. I mean, it's 60, 70, 80, how many thousand, it's way to hell up there. And in aviator temperature scale, it's RFC, really freaking cold. So the components up there have to tolerate that environment. Well, it turns out that if I have the airplanes wrong, it's just because I'm old and don't remember right, but I'll say it as if I remember it right. The actuators for the flight controls on the wings were actually grafted from a Cessna Citation 10. So bizjet actuators that don't fly in the bososphere. So if you get those things too cold, they don't respond the way they would in a Citation. And the flight control computer in a Global Hawk was programmed in a way that if I told the aileron to go to 3 degrees down, it had a position sensor on it, and it would report its position. And if it went to 2.5 degrees down, I'll tell it one more time, what part of 3 was unclear to you? And then ask it, where are you now? I'm at 2.6. I'm shutting off commands to that aileron because it's not doing what it's told. So that's how the flight control computer was programmed. And the F-16 one isn't unlike that. On the ground in the flight control checks, the computer tells the flight controls to go to a whole bunch of different places relatively quickly and it measures their response. And it doesn't go with it tells you. You get a flight control built-in test failure and you got to figure out what you're going to do about it. Normally you just do it again and let things warm up. But in Global Hawk, it's a giant glider. I mean, the wingspan, I don't know, 100 feet, some huge number like that. So anybody who's a glider pilot knows gliders prefer to land with spoilers, if spoilers are a term you understand. So for non-aerodynamic guys, you put panels on the top of the wing that look a lot like ailerons, except for in the landing phase or on touchdown, they pop up and they spoil the lift so that the airplane will stay on the ground once it's on the ground, because airplanes that pogo stick down the runway are difficult to manage, especially when there's no dude in it. But now the computer that's doing the landing has to sort that shit out. So spoilers are super important on a glider. So there's 2 sets of spoilers on the Global Hawk. The actuators act just like flight control actuators. So when you finally decide I'm done with my test mission, I'm going to bring the airplane down, the first thing the guys do is pop the spoilers and create lots of drag on the airplane, kill the lift, and get it going downhill. Well, they do that. The spoilers come up. They don't go to where they're supposed to. Flight control computer says, let's try it again. Does it again. Didn't go where they're supposed to. Flight controller says, you're done. Puts them down. There is no reset button. So now I have no spoilers. Do you know what the emergency procedure for the Global Hawk said if spoiler failure happened in flight?
Put the gear down.
Nope. Program the airplane to a spot in 5,000 feet underground.
Really?
Because now you know where it's going to crash. It was deemed unlandable without spoilers.
Wow.
So squadron commander comes running into the meeting I'm in. The spoilers have failed. It's up in the bozosphere coming down. And they got their $40 million sensor on the front of the airplane. And they whip up in the book, spoiler failure. It says here to crash it.
Wow.
So they come running in, they interrupt the meeting. I'm with the wing commander, and he tells the story. And my first question, this was, I hadn't quite failed yet. But I had one good question in me. My first question was, and again, I don't know the global, all these details about the flight. I don't know this yet. This was, I learned all this later. My first question to him, as soon as he said, here's a problem with the airplane. The spoilers are locked out. We're going to have to put the airplane into the lake bed and get the recovery process started. And the question came to mind, Rip, how much gas is in that jet? He goes, oh, we've probably got about 14 hours. I says, and you got about 13 and a half hours to find a better answer than that. So all stop for the day, and everybody descending upon that team to figure out what else can we do other than planting that airplane in the middle of the lake bed and starting over. So I contributed a bit more. I got with the team and we brainstormed and we brainstormed and we brainstormed, and I didn't really understand the problem. Why can't it land? And they said, well, because it's auto land, and there's kind of two ways to land an airplane. And in the test pilot school, they'll teach you the term front side landing or backside landing. But basically what it boils down to is, do you fly in a way that you control your landing attitude with pitch, or you're landing decent with pitch, or do you do it with power? That's kind of the definition between backside and front side and that kind of thing. Anyway, so when the airplane goes to a landing mode, it became a airspeed and angle seeking algorithm to fly the whatever it is 3-degree glide path coming down to the impact point at a pre-programmed speed, pick a number, 120 knots. So it used throttle, spoilers were already out, so you had lots of drag, and it was going to fly this. And with no spoilers, when you got down a 3D glide path, it would accelerate, even at idle.
Yeah.
So you're going 120, 130, 140, 150. It gets into the flare at 150. Plenty of lifties. It's going to balloon. It's going to shove its own stick forward. It's going to come back down, and you're off to the races, and you have no clue where this airplane's going to land.
Wow.
So landed out of spoiler. So, well, if the problem is going too fast down final, thrust and drag are the opposing forces. Get rid of the thrust. This is so we're at idle. I said, no, get rid of the thrust. Shut the motor off. And their response was, well, that's a one-way ticket. We can't restart the motor once we turn it off. I says, dude, we're on a one-way ticket. You've already told me the answer is a one-way ticket. So let's figure out what happens if we shut the motor off. He goes, well, we know what happens if we shut the motor off. Okay, what happens when you shut the motor off? It will stop doing what it was told to do, and it will auto land at its pre-programmed emergency landing point. because if it's doing a mission and loses a motor, it knows where to go. Okay, what's its emergency landing point? Lake bed runway 30. Well, that's not a bad answer. It's going to auto land at lake bed runway 30. It says, well, yeah, but it's going to do it from way up high, and it's going to accelerate, and you're going to have the same problem. I said, well, not if we turn off the motor very late. I said, what do you mean? He says, tell it to go to lake bed runway 30 as its new landing point, not its program landing point on the regular runway. So tell it you're going to land over here today, because you can do that in flight. You could divert the airplane, divert it to where it's going to go when you shut the motor off. So those two are congruent. And then once it's there and on 120 knots on final, then shut the motor off. It's not going to have a lot of time to accelerate. And I got all these looks like, Clearly yours truly was the only one who had thought of that. So we had a simulator down in Southern California somewhere. I want to say the airplane was built by, I think Global Hawk was Northrop Grumman, if I remember the company right. So they had a field support office in El Segundo, where the Global Hawk simulator lived. I said, get those, this is now 10 o'clock at night. So get those dudes in the simulator and program the airplane the way it is now, the same amount of gas, same weight, get them going, point toward lake bed runway 30, and shut the motor off, and bring it in at, pick a number, 5,000 feet, shut the motor off, watch what happens. 4,000 feet, shut the motor off, see what happens. 2,000 feet, do a big table, do a bunch of runs, what happens? And about an hour and a half later, they come back with, hey, we did it 10 times. If we shut the motor off at 3,000 feet on approach, it'll hit the ground at 125 knots. So slightly over planned landing speed. I said, all right. There's only one problem. So what's that? Lake runway 30 at 3,000 feet, you're over the top of the NASA complex. I said, okay, I guess we're evacuating the NASA complex. So we called the NASA commander, we sent the security forces out there, so we basically took that, and the chance of the airplane, you shut the motor off and it going straight down was 0. But we didn't want anybody around. So this became the plan. Well, this is now the most important thing happening at Edwards for the year, because we're about to do what's never been done before on this airplane with a really expensive sensor on the nose. So that is where I fell off the cliff. So knowing that this was the most important thing on the planet, instead of staying in my lane and being above the fray, I got into the weeds. And there was a lot of fear that I was not going to be the only one doing that. So the bad decision I made was to believe I needed to be the shield between the test team and the rest of the base leadership, and keep them out of the way so that the test team could execute this final decision. So spin the clock back a little bit. I was the previous squadron commander at Edwards that was in charge of base operations. So unknown to me at the time, I was literally, this is now after midnight, I was literally the only guy on the base who actually knew the airfield complex, the lake bed runways, the lake bed environment. I was the only one with a heartbeat at that time that actually understood all of that. So the squadron commander looked to me and said, when was the last time we've checked lake bed runway 30? And I said, I don't know. I'll find out. So first mistake, I'm going to find out the status of runway 30. So I called up my base ops team. We literally had a guy who had been at Edwards on the order of 50 years who knew every grain of sand on the lake bed. His nickname was Lake Bed Larry. And I called Lake Bed Larry to get his help, and I can't reach him. So in the end, the only people left that can determine the status of lake bed runway 30 should have been me. But since I was playing shield, I passed that responsibility to the base operations team, who routinely go out on the lake beds and check them for clearance and whatever, who knew the lake bed areas very well. In fact, they trained me to be night qualified to drive on the lake beds in the dark. They quite literally put a bag over your head, take you to the middle of the lake bed, then take the bag off and say, get back to main base without crashing. Because there's ravines, there was things you could drive into that were bad, and there were obstacles and ruts and all that. So it wasn't just this clear piece of glass for hundreds of square miles. There were a lot of dangerous things that could happen. So to be night qualified, to driving a lake bed, you got to go through a training course. And the check ride was to take you out in the lake bed in the dark, where you don't know where you're at, and you got to find your way back. So I called up these kids. They were kids, young airmen. I said, get in the truck, go check out lake bed 30, and let me know what you find. That was a mistake. I knew lake bed 30 was not an issue. It's about 15 miles from the end of lake bed runway 30 to Palmdale. What I really wanted to know was lake bed runway 30 all the way to Palmdale, because we didn't really know where it was going to land. It was going to be told to land on runway 30, but the simulator isn't the airplane. So we don't know where it's actually going to land. It'll be on center line of runway 30, but where it's going to touch down, big mystery. So what I should have done is got in the car with them and drove down lake bed runway 30. And the aha moment would have hit me at the end of runway lake bed 30, where it's actually painted with tar, it's black, and the headlights of the truck were looking out towards Palmdale, and there's lake bed in front of you. When I told the kids, go check out runway lake bed 30, they got to the end of lake bed 30, turned back around, went up and down it twice, called back on the radio, sir, lake bed runway 30 is in perfect condition. It is good to go. And I dropped that out of my cross-check. What was more interesting was what was 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 miles long of the end of lake bed 30. And I knew it. But in that moment, my mind was in the wrong place. So the expertise that the squadron commanders were looking to me to provide that I didn't use. And I delegated that to my base ops kids and gave them the wrong instructions. I knew what I wanted them to do, but I told them, go check out runway lake bed 30. And in my mind, they would do what I would do and drive forever. They did what they were told. They checked out lake bed 30, came back, it's good to go. So airplane comes down. We're holding over the NASA complex until we get out of gas. I said, we're going to burn all the gas and make the airplane as light as possible. We just sat there and burned gas down. And this is now 3 in the morning or so. Okay, guys, time to go. Kill the motor. First difference between the sim and the airplane. You got to type a command in the keyboard to turn the motor off. That doesn't take 0 seconds.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't turn the motor off. It closes a valve on the airframe. So all the fuel in the line past that point still gets burned. So the airplane is programmed to land at the midpoint of runway 30. By the time the motor gets and the guy in the console is just freaking out because he typed in the engine kill command and it doesn't die, and it's coming down final and the motor's not shutting off, and he's sending the command and saying the command and the airplane's not shutting off. It was probably 10 seconds before the motor finally spun down. So it had a lot more energy in its current profile than the simulator led you to believe it would have. So it overflew the center point of runway 30 about 20 feet in the air. Not so bad. So we thought. So it finally does land, and there's no camera on the nose of the airplane, but the airplane's fully instrumented. So we have all these needles in the control room that have airspeed, altitude, G, and the interesting one was yaw angle. So we're watching the yaw angle, and it's going just bouncing like it's on the ground. It is bouncing down the lake bed, and it's programmed to stay on center line, and it's going to hit the brakes pretty soon, and we're all going to be heroes. Next thing you know, it goes. The yaw needle goes hard left. Well, that's not a good sign. And the engineer goes, sir, that's no big deal. It probably got in a rut and it just spun. So we're going to be fine. So big high fives in the control room. Everybody's happy. The airplane didn't crash, yada, yada, yada. So I get in the truck. We go barreling down Lake Bed Runway 30 in the dark. And we see two black lines in the dirt on the lake bed where it touched down about 1,000 feet short of the end of the runway. So 10,000 feet past where we thought it was going to. But the lake bed is relatively flat, and it didn't get to Palmdale, so this is going to be good. So we keep going, we keep going, we keep going, and then I just had the most let down of my life when the headlights showed me what I knew was there. Space shuttle landing lights. About 10 of them. 2 of them are now missing. Had the airplane landed 8 or 9 feet either way, we'd have missed them. But the right wing went right through one of them, busted off. That's why the airplane spun. I was the only guy that knew there were space shuttle landing lights a mile long of the end of runway 30, because if the shuttle was going to come land on Edwards, it was going to point at those landing lights from way up high and then end up on the runway. Had I driven the runway myself, I'd have kept going past the end of the runway. I'd have seen those damn landing lights, and I would have called the civil engineers to get those damn things out of here, and they would have bulldozed them over. Then I would have been a hero. But as they say in aviation, you can go from hero to goat in a millisecond. And when I decided to tell the base ops kids to go check out runway 30 instead of doing it myself, I went from hero to goat, just like that. Now, in the end, everybody was happy. The airplane had a broken wing. I don't think they ever repaired it. I think they trashed the airframe, but the sensor was fine. It wasn't damaged. So, maybe they gave me a B+. But I felt like an absolute abject failure because I blew it. I knew I was the only guy that had the knowledge at the time that could have prevented that final piece, and I didn't use it because I was so worried about shielding my team from the rest of the base leadership that I got out of my lane and acted in that way, which was, it literally haunts me to this day that I could have done something different.
Really? What did your boss say to you then?
Greece, no big deal. The airplane's fine. I mean, what they said behind closed doors, I have no idea. But because as you recall, Super was my colleague.
Yeah.
He made 2-star and I didn't. So was that one of the many chinks in my armor over the next 10 years? Who knows? Because my wing commander and at that time the center commander, both carried on in the Air Force, and they were part of the selection process to who's going to be the next general. So did they remember that event or not? Don't know. I sure remember it. But so those sorts of things, when you're about to have a major aircraft accident, the group commander is involved 100%. I did 3 memorial services while I was a group commander. That is gut-wrenching. I passed the flag to the widow on one of them. That's a killer. I mean, say nothing to what the wife is feeling. 10 times worse. I, I almost hesitate to say the word fortunately, but on the positive side for me, those investigations didn't reveal anything in the leadership chain that could have prevented those accidents. That doesn't really make me feel better in the end, but at least I didn't feel worse that I was part of the cause. Whereas on the Global one, I was absolutely part of the cause. No, I didn't make the ailerons freeze. No, I didn't make the airplane not shut off when we were supposed to. No, I didn't predict the 10-second delay in the engine shutdown. Yeah, all that. But I had the knowledge to prevent that last problem, and I didn't use it. But we lost an F-22 while I was there. Guy was doing inside the airplane, F-22, you can carry bombs. So there's a bomb rack type thing. And if you're going to carry bombs, you got to make sure that the loads of the airplane and the loads at the bomb and parts on the bomb rack aren't going to break anything. So you go out and do max G testing to make sure all the parts stay where they're supposed to, and they put strain gauges and all the components to measure the loads. They call that loads testing. And you go out and you go to the corner of the envelope and you max out the airplane. And this guy went to 9 Gs and fell asleep. So, yeah, that was horrible. We had a T-38 in the test pilot school, probably 45-year-old airplane at that point, maybe 50. I mean, very old, lots of mechanical issues. I don't remember exactly what broke on the airplane, but the airplane got into pitch oscillations because of the malfunction. And when they bailed out, the ejection seat in the T-38 is not great. So one guy died and the other guy was severely injured. So those are the dark days in leadership positions when you have to deal with the outcomes of those sorts of events, all the way through, standing back and letting the safety investigation work entirely unimpeded and completely independently, because they bring people from other bases in so that you can't interfere, and you got to stay out of their chili, and you can't keep calling them asking what's the status. You just got to leave them alone. And every day of not knowing is just a killer. Sometimes you got to ground the fleet because you don't know what happened. Sometimes you got to ground the Air Force fleet. You got to call up AFMC or ACC and say, we recommend you stop flying all of your F-16s until we figure this out. That is not an inconsequential decision. Probably the best news story while I was there. It was I had two events that I'm pretty proud of, actually, because I was smart enough to stay the hell out of the way. When you say, what is the real job of a group commander? Stay the hell out of the way. So we had an A-10 come in, and it was flying at Nellis, and one of the 30 millimeter rounds blew up in the chamber. So it blew a big hole outside the airplane, spit a couple of barrels of the gun out from the airplane, all kinds of problems. And I don't know how the decision came to this, but he's diverting to Edwards. He's not landing at Nellis for whatever reason. I wasn't brought into the story to know why that decision came, but not my problem. I have a guy in the tower, a test guy in the tower. He calls me as the group commander. He goes, hey, sir, let you know, A-10 emergency inbound, got a gun problem. He's going to land wheels up on the main runway. And I went, what, dude? We only got one runway. I've got 15, 20 airplanes scattered across the Edwards test airspace right now. He comes in and lands on the main runway. We're going to divert a whole bunch of guys. Ask him if he can land on the lake bed, because we have lake bed runways for a reason. We land on them all the time. I said, we'll do. He goes, we'll do. So we send the crash crews out there. We orchestrate all the support personnel to get that event handled in real time. And tower guy calls back and says, "Hey, sir," he says negative. He wants to land on the main runway. And I had about 10 seconds of thought, going, "Why the hell would he not want to land on a lake? If you're going to land wheels up, he's going to have stability problems. Wouldn't you rather have an infinitely wide runway than one only 300 feet wide? Wouldn't you rather have an infinitely long runway than one that's only 18,000 feet long? So I'm thinking about all this, and a big part of me wants to say, ask him again. but my non-failure mode was, don't ever fly the jet for him when he's the one dealing with the problem. Give him options and then support their decision. His decision was land on the main runway. A A-10 on the runway, safe and sound, and a guy who climbs out of the cockpit and walks away is a much better answer than other possibilities. So I'll deal with whatever else happens later. And I told the tower guy, start diverting everybody to Palmdale. So all the test guys got called on the common frequency. Hey, Edwards is going to close. Don't even try to get back here. Plan to land Palmdale, and we'll come get you. We had to send vehicles out to Palmdale to pick these guys up because their car is back at Edwards. So big logistics problem I just created. Maintainers are now panicking because they got to get in trucks and go running down to Palmdale with tools and start carts and hydraulics and a big deal. Sorry. So the maintenance group's commander is calling me going, Grease, what are you doing? I said, dude, I got an airplane inbound. It's got live rounds on it. One of them blew up. I don't know the condition of the airplane. The pilot says he wants to land gear up on the main runway. He's coming. So nobody else is coming back to Edwards. So got it. So anyway, guy comes down. Good news. I didn't know the airplane. When the wheels are up on the A-10, when the landing gear is up, the wheels are still exposed. So you land on the mains. The nose gear was up because it was part of the gun problem. So he lands, and apparently this is a known thing in the A-10. When you got a nose gear problem, you land on the mains, it just feels funny because you're about 8 feet lower than you were normally, and you just coast along. You even have brakes. And you just coast along, and then in the last 20, 30 feet, the elevator loses authority, and it'll start to scrape. So you get some sparkies off the back end of the airplane, but it's a relatively benign event to land the airplane gear up. Turns out it's a relatively benign event. The guy comes down the runway with this broomstick sticking out the front of the airplane. That's one of the barrels. He lands, shuts down, fire crews are there. He gets out, walks out. It's all over. So I get the guy in the car, I drive him back, say, hey, great landing, dude. That was awesome. Help me understand, why didn't you want to land on the lake bed? He goes, dude, it says right on the book. In the event of a gun malfunction, yada, 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 land on a hard surface. Because if that pogo stick digs into anything, you're going to tumble the airplane. That's not the ending you want. Hadn't even thought of that. Good thing I let him fly his own airplane. So that airplane sat there for almost a week.
Did it?
Because it had live rounds in it. And my EOD guys don't do A-10s. And they walk up to the airplane and they see this big ass hole in the side of the airplane, and they can look inside and they see all these big brass 30 millimeter things sticking out the side. They go, oh, that's not my problem, guy. And they put a bunch of cones around the airplane and say, we're done. So they gotta get the EOD guys from Nellis to get all their equipment in trucks, drive it down to Edwards, meticulously take the airplane apart piece by piece to expose what rounds are left, carefully remove these rounds out of the middle of the airplane to safety airplane, and then put the slings under it, crane it up, put it on the flatbed, and haul it away.
Wow.
So the next decision I got to make as a group commander was, how the hell did we recover from a week without the runway? And which test missions can we do at Palmdale? Which ones can we not? And then I get the call from the NASA commander on Sunday morning. Says, hey, I got a Hornet. I got a launch today. He has to go. I said, dude, runway's closed. He goes, I don't need the whole runway. I'm going, how are we going to do that? So walk me through this. He goes, I'll taxi the guy out. I'll put him aft to your A-10. We'll go down 1,000 feet. We'll still have 7,000 feet of runway in front of us, and all of lake bed runway 20 in front of 22 in front of us. Plenty of runway. We can do this. So what's the min operating runway for a Hornet? 5,500 feet. All right. So I drove out there and I led him out to the runway and made damn sure he was 1,000 feet long in the A-10, and then got off the runway and let him go, and it was fine. He took off. So, and the other one was test pilot school mission. Little well known that we don't train the combat air forces to fly engine out landings in the F-16. They fly engine out approaches. Well, they don't do engine out landings. And we don't teach them spin recovery. We teach them spin prevention. Test pilot school is the only place that we do spin recovery. So some units, there was somebody before me started a program where they would send 3 or 4 CAF guys to Edwards to go through the test pilot school spin recovery training for awareness of how do you actually get the F-16 out of spin when it goes into a spin. But it wasn't a fleet-wide, thing. So test pilot school missions up there, they're doing the spin training for a student at test pilot school. Turned out to be a C5 pilot in the front seat, and one of our guest help instructors in the back seat, long-time F-16 guy, another one of those calm, cool, collected dudes who can, no kidding, walk down the street and put himself to sleep. And they're doing the spin thing, and they didn't know it yet, but they lose the motor.
Wow.
And we do spin training literally over the top of the airfield on purpose, 25,000 feet or whatever. So the first thing they get is whatever the series of warnings are in the F-16 when the generator and hydraulic pumps are no longer up to spec. So the generator's not putting out enough voltage, and the generator failure light comes on. Hydraulic pump isn't putting out enough pressure, you get a hydraulic pressure warning. That's a clue that the motor isn't spinning as fast as it should be. So they get those warnings first, and then the guy looks down at the engine instruments and sees the RPM decreasing rapidly through 30, 40%, whatever the number is, and idle's like 50 or 60. So now he realizes the motor's out. He looks at the engine temperature gauge. I think in the F-16 it's called FTIT, something turbine inlet temperature. Different airplanes call it different things, but it's the turbine temperature, and it's 0. So he goes, motor's flamed out. So he immediately takes the airplane from the C5 kid, declares emergency, and starts going through engine restart procedures. He's at 20-ish thousand feet. He's got about something less than 5 minutes to figure this out. So he's circling down, engine restart, it's not restarting. So he gets to probably 15,000 feet or 10,000 feet and says, I'm done with this. I'm going to do a flame out landing. And he sets the airplane up for, and oh, by the way, you only have 8 minutes of hydrazine rocket powered fueled auxiliary flight control gadget available, plus or minus 2 or 3 minutes. There's no hydrazine rocket fuel gauge that tells you with a countdown timer. Does that make sense? I'm talking the hydrazine rocket motor, how it works. Yeah. So for non-F-16 guys, the airplane absolutely has to have hydraulic and electrical power to fly. So when the engine quits, there's a rocket bottle, a bottle of no shit rocket fuel that ignites, and the exhaust is spit into a turbine, and that turbine spins an auxiliary hydraulic and hydraulic pump and electrical generator so that the airplane can fly. But when you run a hydrazine, you're done. You're bailing out. So the book says it'll go about 8 minutes, but about is relative term. And the more you move the flight controls and stuff, apparently, the faster you burn the rocket fuel. So anyway, so he's on a timer that whether or not he started a stopwatch at that point, I have no idea, but he knows it's not unlimited, and he's running out of altitude anyway, so he's putting this jet on the ground. And so he's circling down, and he comes down, and he tells us afterwards, we got on final. As an F-16 pilot, you do hundreds of simulated flame out approaches. So you know exactly what it's going to look like when you get on final. And you just don't touch down. You just, 10 feet in the air, you goose the motor and you climb away and you go do another one. But you always start from the same place over the airfield. It's all controlled, So anyway, so practice is a reality in this case. He says, I roll out on final, I see the runway, and I have this horrible sinking feeling that I'm not going to make it. because now the engine is not at idle, it's locked rotor. So it's way draggier than the airplane would have been. The other technique in the F-16 community that doesn't always work out so well is there is an optimum airspeed to fly down final without a motor. Best range airspeed is what you would call it. That's weight dependent, configuration dependent, but not wind dependent.
Mm.
The lifties on the airplane don't know if it's wind or not. But the community had a bit of a myth that if you got 20 knots of headwind coming down final on a engine out landing, you should actually fly faster down final to compensate for that wind. Dead wrong. You don't adjust your final approach speed. You adjust your final approach point. Okay. You start to turn sooner. Because if there's an optimum point to fly the airplane for min drag, and you're at the optimum point, if you go faster, you have more drag. If you go slower, you have more drag.
Yeah.
So flying faster is the wrong answer. But other than that, that was the only complicating factor in the whole thing. And he lands a couple thousand feet down the runway because he didn't really appreciate, once you got into ground effect, the airplane floats a very long time at engine out approach speed, at a much higher approach speed than you would do normally. So we had plenty of canards. You got into ground effect and just pillowed the airplane down the middle of the runway for 2,000 or 3,000 feet, touchdown halfway down. And he was literally one of the handful of pilots on the planet that had ever successfully engine out landed the airplane on a runway. So big hurrahs all around.
He didn't give any consideration to ejection?
Not yet, because he had 20,000 feet of altitude, and he was literally over the top of an airfield.
Okay.
So if he'd have been 15 miles away from the airfield, the only thing he would have been thinking of, where do I point the airplane for ejection? So he's not going to make a runway. Yeah. One of the things I did, I flew the F-16 a lot as a group commander because there were no F-15s to fly. So my favorite thing to do in the airplane as a non-F-16 guy from the back seat was, on the way back from mission, the front seat let me fly the airplane. I said, okay, you tell me when we lose the motor. Put it in idle, and I'll figure out how and if we're going to get back. So we'd be at 30,000 feet, and I would do this crazy long glide, and halfway through going, nope, we're not going to make it. We're going to go to the lake bed over here and punch out, whatever. So that was it's just something I did to occupy my brain on the way home, But he did it nearly flawlessly, but he admitted when he got on final, it just looked different. It is different because the motor's locked up, and you're way draggier than you anticipated. But the technique for flame out landing is you don't point at the end of the runway, you point at the middle of the runway, so you have margin on both sides. And Edwards, 18,000 foot runway, you got 9,000 on both sides. Yeah. Things are going to have to go very badly for you to miss the runway. And if you do, it don't matter. The lake bed is 5 miles of landable surface short of the runway. Wow. So you can land 3,000 feet short of the runway and just land on the lake bed and just coast up to the concrete and taxi off. So that's why we do those engine tests out at Edwards. It is a much more forgiving environment for those kinds of tests. And training guys how to do it. But it turns out that when you spin an F-16 and you got the airplane going sideways, the air going down the intake isn't going down the intake so good, and the motor compressor stalled. And in the safety investigation later, we discovered that there was some reprogramming going on in the engine community on the F-16 in anticipation of a new component that never got fielded. So he triggered this code without knowing it. And the engine, instead of recovering, went into stall stagnation. And when he saw that the turbine temperature was 0, it wasn't 0. It had spun all the way around from 0 back to 0. So its turbine temperature was 1800 or something crazy, and they melted the motor wholesale, the whole back. and he's coming down from 20,000 feet. Engine restart, there's some more fuel. Engine restart, here's some more fuel. Engine restart, here's some more fuel. And just totally cooked the motor in the back end. He had no idea. Had no idea. Nobody had ever seen the turbine temperature spin around all the way back to zero.
Wow. That has shades of what you were saying in one of the earlier episodes about the um, PW229s that you were using at Lakenheath, where there was the little part of the range where it was they'd changed the fuel's schedule or whatever.
Yeah, yeah,
D-
yeah.
Chris, tell me a little bit about risk then. I mean, it's interesting you talk about the funerals you had to go to, the handing the flag to the guy's widow. You'd obviously had your own ejection, very close call. You talked about afterwards, having that sort of flashback or that moment, where you kind of blacked out when you took your first ride back in the Strike Eagle again. What do these experiences do to shape your appetite for risk, your personal appetite for risk, and for your willingness to get back into the cockpit? I mean, I don't want to make it sound like did you think about throwing in the towel, because obviously you didn't, but does it shape the way you think? I mean, you had children at this point. You just talked about the fact your daughter was born at Edwards. What does it do to your frame of mind?
It absolutely shapes your mind as you get older. And in the end, it gets to the point of, remember I talked about risk and risk mitigation and risk transfer and risk avoidance. When we got here to when we got here to Eglin, my last assignment was flying with the 40th, and then I retired, and then I got into the weapons business. So I'm a civilian, not flying anymore, but I have a civilian license. And there's an aero club at Eglin, and I had flown in every aero club at every base I'd been at. So getting checked out in the aero club was kind of automatic. And I announced to darling wife that, hey, I'm going to make an appointment at the aero club and get checked out in the 182 here. And she goes, do we have to orphan the kids for a hobby? She was serious.
Was she?
Yep. It's like, hey, when you did it for a living and it was part of your job and it was part of who you were, and it was defending your country and those are all things that go into the factor of accepting the risk. When you're literally going out for fun and buying $100 hamburgers, because that costs $100 to fly to another airfield and get a hamburger, is that risk still worth it? She was dead on. So I literally haven't flown a little airplane since.
Really?
Yep.
Really?
And I have 3 colleagues who have died in little airplanes since.
Yeah, it's not it's not a great advert for flying, is it?
Well, but single engine
flying.
But you think about if tens of thousands, if not millions of hours accumulated, throughout the years, that's not that many. But death is kind of binary. So she was right.
Yeah.
The risk versus gain equation then became lopsided, and so I don't fly little airplanes anymore. Because I don't need to. I did it when I don't ski anymore either. So I think as you're an aviator and you go through your career, when you're brand new in the airplane, you're invincible, you're brilliant, you can handle anything, you're not scared of anything. And then in my time, we went from training to combat. All of a sudden, you're scared of a lot of stuff because for real now, things are really shooting at you, and people are really dying, and airplanes are really wrecking, and the reality of the incredible unforgiveness of the aviation environment now becomes real. And so you have to create mental tools to deal with that. And then you leave combat and you go back to the training world again, and you get older and older, and then you look around, you have a family. So yeah, all that goes into the calculus as you get older. And I think in many ways, that's a good reason why the senior Air Force leaders don't fly. Because when I jumped out of the airplane, the wing commander met me in the hospital afterwards. And he was the wise old sage. And he says, Grease, in aviation, you start with a bag of luck and a bag of skill. And when you're young, your bag of luck is full, but your bag of skill is skinny. And little by little, you trade your bags of luck for bags of skill. As you accumulate skill, you don't have to be as lucky. You you are now going to rely on skill for the rest of your life because you just dumped out your bag of luck. So that gets any, that certainly comes to mind. I don't know of anybody who stopped flying until they were told to. So apparently, if you're wired for aviation, you find ways to cope with that risk, and you find ways to deal with it mentally, and you rationalize it, and you keep moving. And 10 to 20 people a year in the Air Force pay with their lives for that. It's reality. But yeah, I think it's just kind of an internal coping mechanism we come up with that we constantly refuel to stay in the game. And a lot of it, I mean, when you're in the military flying business, you take the oath. And part of the oath says, I will give my life in their defense. When you're a lieutenant, you kind of don't think of it that way. But as you get older, you realize that's the commitment I have made. I'm not going to give my life stupidly. But when it comes down to it, if that's what has to be, that's what I've agreed to do. And that's part of our culture that is a little bit different than the other, 300 plus million people in America. There's on the order of 1 million total in the military, and on the order of 300 who are not. And you count in the fire department and the police and the FBI, and maybe add another 1 million. But 1 to 2% of our population, and the same in England, I'm sure, have said, hey, my country is so important to me that I'm expendable. So that is one of the differences in the military or first responder type careers, where you may not be as important as you think you are.
Yeah.
You're really important to your family, but in the grand scheme of things, you're another chess piece on the board, and sometimes chess pieces come off the board. So
take us back then to the rest of your career. Then, I mean, so one of the things I really wanted to talk to you about was RMP. So you worked on APG-82 for the Striker. We worked on AIM-9X.
Yep.
Can you describe those two programs? I mean, the audience will know what both of those things are. I mean, the AESA radar for the Strike Eagle and the AIM-9X is self-explanatory. Were you involved in those from the start? Were you were you testing them?
Testing. Yeah, it was mid, probably sort of as we develop new systems. The first phase is called developmental test. The next phase is called operational test. So test pilot school dudes do the developmental test. Combat type guys go through training to become operational testers, different than test pilot school. So it isn't a clean break between the two. And sometimes there's this big push for combined DT/OT, and there's a mythology that you can do it better if you combine it, whatever. But the skills are different. What you're looking for is different. Part of the developmental test is, does it work as advertised? And part of operational test is, it works as advertised. How do I employ it? So different objectives. And along the way, does it really work as advertised? Because I'm continuing testing that they didn't do. So there's kind of both. But yeah, so I got in. So my last assignment was on the center advisory council for, at that time, Eglin was a center. The Air Armament Center. It is no longer. There were 10 centers in the Air Force at the time. Air Force Flight Test Center at Edwards, Air Armament Center at Eglin, 3 or 4 logistics centers, maintenance, sustainment center for airplanes, the Aerospace Systems Center, which was program offices up at Wright Pat. So all these things called centers. And centers had center S words. So you had personnelists and financial managers and training monitor, all the army of people supporting the center S word. So Air Force is going through another reduction. I think this was the time when the chief of staff said, I want to get the Air Force down under 350,000 people total. So they were looking to scrape off bodies anywhere they could. And somebody had the brilliant idea, hey, Arnold was a center, Eglin was a center, Edwards was a center. Each center had about 50 plus people surrounding that center commander, keeping him propped up. What if we had one test center with 50 people and all those other things just became bases? I would save 150 positions. So that happened. But while I was there, it was still a center. I was on the center S-word as the chief of safety. So I was attached to fly with the 40th, which is our test execution squadron at Eglin. There's the 780th, the test planning squadron. Test execution was in the 40th. And it's in the same building as the 85th. I don't think they're called flight test squadron. I don't remember what their letters are afterwards. But we're literally co-located with the operational testers, same building.
Yeah.
So we would fly each other's missions and share resources. And it was really, really synergistic. Whoever came up with the idea was freaking brilliant. So detached to the 40th to fly up to 40th. So I got to fly test missions as a colonel at that time for 2 years. And at the time, the new radar was in the airplane under test. There were two jets outfitted. We did it right this time. We had 2 jets, not just one. And AIM-9X was deep in the field. They had shot lots of AIM-9Xs by that point. But the albinos, as we called them, were going through the AIM-9X integration with the helmet.
Yep.
So those are the 2 big test activities while I was there. And the test discovery that I was a part of, and I was the only guy who discovered it, but I got to see it happen, was one of the benefits of putting a now 20-year newer computer in the airplane behind the radar was that it could think a bit faster. and one of the most challenging computational tasks on the radar was to do synthetic aperture radar mapping. There's just gigabytes of math going on behind the scenes to make that picture. And in the APG-70 on the Strike Eagle, if you're on the order of 20 miles out and you do your offset turn and you're looking sideways and you have that radar do its thing, to create that image took 6 to 10 seconds, depending on a lot of things. This thing you pull the trigger to command we call it the map, to command the map, boom, there it was.
Really?
We were King Kong. It was beautiful. It was the first time I didn't believe it when they told me, oh, Greece, you won't believe how quick it makes the maps and how sharp they are. The resolution's way better. I mean, the resolution on the APG-70 we thought was game changing. This was a whole nother level better. We would put barrels out on the test range, 55-gallon drums, and I don't remember the numbers anymore, but you pick a number. 20 feet apart, 18 feet apart, 16 feet apart, 12 feet apart. And the mission was go do maps of these barrels and figure out how far apart you could tell 2 barrels from 10 miles, 20 miles, 30 miles, 40 miles, 50 miles. It was all basically calculating how good is this thing really, And so we're doing these missions, and out of nowhere, the images are awful. They're all washed out. The detail is crap. The barrels look like streams, like took a paintbrush and smeared them. And everybody, what the hell changed? It worked perfectly last week. And we're ripping the airplane apart, looking for, is there a bad wire? We're ripping out going through the aircraft code. Did they muck up the code? Just all kinds of troubleshooting to figure out what the hell happened. And I did a mission and I did some maps and they looked just fine. And so we come back down, and in the debrief, I had the aha experience. I'm looking at the maps and I'm like, every map I made was looking north. Just coincidentally, it was north. Go into the vault, grab somebody else's tape, looking at it. Theirs is east and theirs is a mess. What the hell? what we found out was when they author the code for the radar, it's not moving. It's in a computer. So they have to lie to the computer which way is it facing. So it was hard coded to be north. So when the computer asked, what is my heading? The computer told itself 360. If you happen to be flying at 360, you got a pretty good map. If you weren't, you got a really shitty one. And since we fly over the water in the Gulf and all the land is to the north, early on, all the testing was done looking north. And we didn't figure out that when they went from the ground unit thing and stuff to code in the airplane, they had to pull that line of code out and replace that line of code with ask the airplane what its heading is. It'll tell you. But that little bit of data is squirming around the bus. The actual heading of the airplane right now is 272.
Wow.
It knows. But the code that was in the computer it is always 360. Except when it's not. So that was a discovery while I was in that test phase. I didn't discover anything to AIM-9X. I did a test shot, did what it was supposed to do. But it was very interesting to be a part of how we called it envelope expansion. I can shoot 2 miles out, 3 miles out, 4 miles out, whatever the numbers are, and how you Pac-Man your way along those lines, and how you really determine the capability of the missile, and then you hand it off to the 85th guys right across the hallway, and they go out and they do the turn and burn shots and try to figure out how to employ it, and then they come back and tell you, I really feel for the bad guys. Because in the Strike Eagle, it's a little draggy. It's not as fast as the albino, doesn't turn as well as the albino. And in our internal training, there were times when you were trained to run away. That if you survived the merge and you had enough energy and you didn't really need to try to kill this guy, run away bravely and live to fight another day. When you add a new AMRAAM and a new AIM-9 to the equation, nobody's running away anymore. But you just can't. You just die 5 seconds later.
Yeah.
So you either stay and turn and die, or you run away and die. Either way, you're dead. And there's all kinds of safety stuff you have to do with a missile that can turn up its own ass. Because you could find yourself in the seeker.
Yeah.
And you sure as shit could find your wingman in the seeker. So all of the employment considerations and how the missile's programmed to avoid that and were all part of the test program.
Wow.
So, and when I was in the Strike Eagle, we didn't start integrating the helmet yet. So I didn't get to do the part where we integrated it with the helmet. It came later.
Yeah.
But the C model guys were doing all that work. So that was another piece of the test program was we were trained from pre-F4 days how to maneuver the airplane to the right position in front of and the side of or behind of, do the maneuvers necessary to make the missile successful.
Yeah.
And now it's look at it. Get your head in the right position to make the missile successful.
Chris, tell me about that from the point of view of the Strike Eagle. I mean, it's noteworthy that the front seat of the Strike Eagle these days has JHMCS. The backseater still doesn't have. I know there are air-to-ground applications for it as well, so you can look at from the backseat. You can look at something. It's interesting to look at the Israelis. They've got both in the I model, both the guy in the front and the back, or girl, has their equivalent of JHMCS, whatever it's called, Dash, whatever it's called. What is your understanding of the rationale for the Air Force not getting JHMCS for the backseater? Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it necessary? Is it unnecessary? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think I would always want more toys as a backseater. So if I had to guess, it's purely fiscal. Those helmets are crazy expensive. They got to be maintained. They got to be calibrated. So my guess is and then you got to wire it to the back seat. So my guess is it was purely a fiscal decision that the return on that investment might be a 10% increase in capability, not a 2x capability. So I'm not going to burn those millions of dollars to get a wee bit better. My guess is that's a decision.
Yeah.
And plus we have the other sensor with the either when I flew it was Lantern, but now it's Sniper and Lightning. It's probably Sniper 2 and Lightning 2 by now. So the back seater has full control of a really cool sensor already that the front seater is capable of controlling, but what a pain in the ass to try to fly the airplane and do that at the same time. So
Yeah.
it kind of makes sense to divide and conquer, use the other sensor for the back seater and give the front sensor. And by the way, the back seater is not going to shoot the missile. So I would love to be able to look at something on the ground and cue a weapon to it immediately, but I can get the targeting pod over there almost as quickly.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing it's purely fiscal.
Another sort of a question for you, which might be sort of more theoretical and practical, but IRST is an interesting one as well. I mean, the C model guys, the Air National Guard guys, for sure, invested some money in getting an IRST pod for their C models. Not sure if they really continued to use that for too long. I don't know if that was successful for them. But as a test guy, did you do much work with IRST? It's okay. Do you have any view? Well, you must have views. What are your views on it as a sensor?
Fantastic.
Right.
Freaking fantastic. We did. So really cool thing about weapons development, a lot of the components are tested long before the weapon is ready. So we call it surrogate testing. So if you go out to Edwards, you can see an F-16, a C-141 cargo airplane with an F-16 nose on the front of it. We flew the F-16 radar on the C-141 for a year before the airplane ever had it. So we do the same thing for weapons. We bolt the seeker to an airplane, and we fly it around, whether it be a biz jet or a Lear or whatever. And we develop the sensor independent of the rocket motor and all that stuff that comes behind it and gather gobs and gobs of data. I'm thinking about a missile time of flight. It's maybe a minute. I can fly that sensor around for 3 hours in a Learjet. So I can put all kinds of backgrounds. I can do all kinds of clouds. I can do all kinds of weather conditions. I can do looking up, looking down, looking up. So I can gather all this sensor data on a surrogate and feed my control algorithms. I can feed my seeker tuning algorithms. I can put an airplane out in front of it with 2,000 bundles of flares and spit flares out like crazy and watch the seeker chase them or not. So all that work was going on for missile development while I was there. So having an IRST where you can passively, in the IR world, as long as you're high enough and it's dry enough, you can see things really far away and they don't know you're looking. Yeah. So that's a truly game-changing capability. And that's exactly why all the Russian jets have them. I mean, as far back as the MiG-29, they had IRSTs.
Yeah.
So
they had them on MiG-23s, didn't they? I mean, they had.
Yeah. So why we didn't adopt that back in the 70s and 80s in the F-15, I have no idea. But it is very useful.
Yeah.
But it's not free, and the term sensor fusion comes into play because if the radar sees it and the IRST sees it and the targeting pod sees it, which one of those three are you going to display?
Yeah.
Or you're going to display all of them and have a glob. Or you're going to have a gadget that says, I see all three of those, and this one's really good in azimuth, and this one's really good in range. So I'm going to take the range from this one and the azimuth from that one and put that on the display and call it blue. And if it's the azimuth of this one and the range of that one, I'll call it orange. And if it's, so you can see the systems integration complexities that can occur when you have multiple sensors. Yeah. And the IRST is really bad in the weather.
Yeah.
So my guess is in the early days of the F-15, it was all Cold War European scenario. The weather was going to suck. So they focused all their dollars on the radar technology and didn't waste time on IRST that was going to be cloudy anyways, and you weren't going to see anything.
Did you, I mean, speaking of sensor fusion, I guess that's sort of a bit of an old hat type thing now. I mean, it's something that has happened, and now you expect a fighter to have sensor fusion, and it's been put into 4th gen and 4.5 gen fighters, and you'd expect 5th and 6th for it to be this there as standard. Were you seeing at the time, and maybe even now, working for the Air Force Research Laboratory, are you seeing exciting things for the future come across your desk, or were you seeing that when you were in test? I mean, collaborative combat aircraft, the Royal Wingman type
Chewy.
concept. Have you had an
A
opportunity?
collaborative combat aircraft is a force ship of Strike Eagles. It can talk to each other.
So expand on that then. I mean, are you naturally cynical about these things? I mean, I know you obviously have there are things you're not going to be able to talk about, and you have a security clearance to maintain, so you've got to be careful what you say. But are you seeing that? Are you observing that, monitoring that? What are your thoughts on
I hate it. It, it no doubt that's the way we're going because it's physics. We cannot create enough pilots fast enough. We cannot create enough Wizzos fast enough. We can't create enough expensive airplanes fast enough. A modern fifth gen fight against a near peer adversary is going to be a numbers game. There, I don't know the exact number anymore, and it's probably classified, so it doesn't matter. But you can't put an infinite number of missiles on the F-35 and the F-22, and we don't have an infinite number of them. The bad guys know exactly how many we have. They
it?
know exactly how many we can physically support in any one operation. So just like playing goalie, if we're putting up 10, they got to put up 11. So being able to be a force multiplier with much less expensive airframes that don't have pink bodies in them that you have to train and pay pilot bonuses to and yada, 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 and retrain when they go off to S-word and, and all of that. All that, of course, makes sense fiscally. The interesting thing is going to be the C2, the command and control of those assets in the combat environment. And, we're only starting to figure out how that's going to be. Is it going to be one F-35 with 4 loyal wingmen? Is it going to be the AWACS controlling them? Is it going to be some guy in NORAD controlling them? Who knows? But the emphasis right now is finding the magic bullet of the inexpensive, attritable combat aircraft. And when you say combat aircraft and inexpensive, those two are at odds.
Yeah.
So, and you're going to play a numbers game. They want to play big numbers games, like lots and lots of these things.
Yeah.
So if you've got, and everybody calculates the cost of airplanes their own way to support whatever agenda they want to support. The worst way to calculate the cost of an airplane is how you would describe the cost of the B-2. So if you look at the B-2 and you say, the first time anybody ever said the words, we ought to have a B-2, and you start the clock right there, and you start adding up every dollar that ever was associated with the B-2 to today, and then divide by 20. That's the cost of the B-2, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or what is the contract price for the next 10? That's an entirely different way to calculate the cost. So when you hear, well, the F-35 costs $200 million, you have no clue what they're using to come up with that number.
Yeah.
So the CCA community is going through that now because, I'm in the target business now, so I know exactly what cost we have given to the money changers to chew on to build a new target from scratch. Because all of our current targets are boneyard airplanes that were restored to flying condition and put remote control devices in them so we can shoot at them. Turns out that if you put pilots in them and shoot them, they don't like that so much. So, so we've gone remote control devices instead, and well, that's not free. You got to build a remote control device and test it, and make sure it does what it's told, and we actually have what they call flight termination systems. So when it doesn't do what it's told, you can mash the button down and it stops flying. So we know from the target business what it costs to build an attritable airplane that isn't going to fly very long. That's job in life is to die bravely in front of a missile under test. We got a good handle on what that costs. So compare that to a combat collaborative airplane that isn't going to be used daily. It's going to be used when needed. So it's going to be kind of like a JASM. It's going to sit in the box until you need it. And then the collaborative part is, how much decision-making authority do you give it? Do you say, you're going to go out 100 miles out ahead of me? Please make it 100 plus or minus 10 on your own. I'm not going to tell you speed up, slow down like I tell my wingman. You're going to be 100 miles, right? Right. I'm making up numbers, you know. And then if you see X, Y, and Z, go shoot it. If you see A, ask for permission. If you see B, do not shoot it. I mean, those sorts of things have to be sorted out to make the CCA thing a reality with secure comms that can't be jammed, intercepted, spoofed, with fail-safe so that when it can't talk to you anymore, what does it do? Where's it going to land? You know, there's a lot going on to figure out how that's going to be employed while they're building the airplanes. And there's, I mean, it's well known now. There's 2 of them flying now. The first tranche, they actually they did what was never going to be done in the acquisition community. I mean, I mean, I have a program management merit badge that says I'm a program manager, but it's kind of like, I've been to the classes, but then I'm in a leadership position, so I don't actually turn the crank as a program manager. I have people for that, you know. So I don't really know what's going on in the program management world, even though the book says I do. But what we've always done in the history of the Air Force is had some number of concepts that we've paid for from some number of companies. And then at some point we say, of those 5 concepts, let's look at these 3 a little further. You 2 are out. And we pay those 3 companies a whole bunch of money to refine their concept. All right, I like these 2. And then we'll do something about these 2 and build the best one. That's historically how we've done it forever. We got down to 2 and said, yes, we'll take them.
Yeah. That's a good thing, though, isn't it? I mean,
it is. It's just bizarre.
Yeah.
We've literally never done it before. Yeah. We had the YF-16 and the YF-18.
17, yeah.
17, yeah.
Yeah.
And picked one. We ended up with both.
Yeah.
But the decision at the time was one. We had the YF-22 and the YF-23. And picked one. Didn't have both. We had whatever that repulsive Boeing thing was that was competing with the F-35 and the F-35. It was the
X-32, wasn't it? Why?
Yeah, whatever
it was. Yeah.
And we only picked one. So when that community is operating at White Pine Air Force Base. I know some of the guys. I talk to them on the phone occasionally, but I'm not running that program at all.
Yeah.
So I'm aware. And when they told me, "Oh no, dude, we're going to award 2 contracts," don't give me that. What are you really going to do? No, we're going to award 2, and we're going to build 2 fleets with these 2. And part of their decision was the aerospace industrial capacity in America isn't big enough in any one company to make the numbers we want. So we're going to buy both. And what normally kills you in an acquisition program is not buying the airplane up front. It's making it live the next 20 years and paying for that. It's going to be in the box. It's not going to cost a whole lot to be in the box. So the sustainment and logistics costs of 2 separate airplanes that aren't flying every day is trivial compared to having them both flying.
Yeah.
So the fiscal decision to buy both isn't nearly as upside down as you think it is once you realize that what really drives the cost of a long-term airframe is the operation and the sustainment. And if you have 2 different ones, you got 2 different parts changed, 2 different motor. I mean, all the logistics and the training and the personnel. That's the real cost of an acquisition program. It's not developing it up front. So having 2 doesn't really cost you a whole lot more if they don't do anything. If they just sit in the box. There'll be plenty of them flying around for training and tactics development and that kind of thing. But nothing like, we don't have any F-15s in a box.
Yeah.
Every one that we produced, we get on the ramp and we use it.
Yeah.
So that's why they were able to do that. And that whole team now is going through the phases of, not only do I understand what the airframe can do, but now I'm going to worry about how is the warfighter going to use it. So the warfighter's involved in that, and it's all happening right, Pat. I'm not involved, so I just watch from the side. But
You about 15 minutes ago or so, you used the term game changer, and I'm reminded of a conversation with Starbaby. I had an interview with him where I think I'd said, or somebody had said, stealth was the F-117 was game changing, and he argued that there's been no game changing. But you view things like AESA as being game changing. I mean,
oh yeah,
yeah,
well, I guess everything, you can say everything is relative. So how big of a step function do you have to create before you declare game changer? Everybody has their own tolerance of that. But to me, some things that a lot of folks deem as evolutionary, in practice, to me, were no kidding revolutionary. Going from the real, what we called real beam, it's called real beam mapping, and it didn't actually make a map. It just made this image on the F-111 that I've told you, that, the story of saving my daughter's life because I was able to interpret that mess into something in your mind, to waiting 5 seconds, and now you have what looks a whole lot like satellite imagery.
yeah,
That is revolutionary, because now I can pick my impact point off of that way easier. Adding GPS to the airplane, my position, all the brain cells I used to spend figuring out the position of my airplane, no longer required. That was revolutionary. The ESA itself, as physically, lots of little baby radars put together in a big array. Some might say that by itself is only evolutionary. But the sensitivity you get, the processing you get, the ability to make multiple beams and do different things at the same time while you do other stuff and do true simultaneous multi-mode actions with a sensor. Sorry, dude, that is revolutionary. AIM-9X was revolutionary. I no longer had to maneuver the airplane to death in order to, get a kill. So there's been plenty, in my opinion, revolutionary things in my lifetime. Will CCA be revolutionary? That story hasn't even started to be written yet, because we know we can build the airplanes. That's not the hard part. Can we make them affordably? Well, we're doing it different. It's not Boeing. It's not Lockheed. It's not Northrop Grumman. In fact, one of the contenders was a qualified small business, on plus or minus a year of it being selected.
yeah.
So if I had to guess, Andrill was reading the tea leaves and seeing the success of that company called Blue Force Technologies, which probably had on the order of 150 people working there, who I worked directly with on an aerial target project, and I saw the wizardry behind the curtain. I suspect some folks at Andrill saw the same wizardry and said,
Were they the guys that did the AI? Were they guys that did the AI for BFM, or am I thinking of a different company? There was a company that put together an AI algorithm or an AI program for BFM, and
yeah, so that was going on simultaneously. So when I got involved with what was then Blue Force Technologies, very small company, freaking wizards working there. They were doing a lab project with AFRL that was called Red Air. So they were trying to design a UAV fighter that one guy in the ground could manage, a 4-ship in a training airspace, so 4 F-35s could fly against 4 Red Air guys that weren't F-35s, that were way cheaper to fly, way cheaper to build, and had one dude controlling them instead of 4 other guys getting, quote, negative training. So the first part of that experiment was, building an inexpensive airframe that could fly in an envelope that was representative enough so that the F-35 guys got good training. So they decided early on it was going to be subsonic, because supersonic makes it way more expensive. So the red airframe is going to be subsonic. There's what we call the training tax on airframes. Take off, cruise to the airspace, get ready to go, take off, cruise there, get ready to go. From that point to that point, that's tax. You're not learning anything. Then you got to go home. More tax. So the requirements for Red Air was get up, pay that tax once, train this warship, hang out, train the next warship, and then go home. So pay that tax once versus twice. So they got a bizjet motor. You know, very high endurance, very low fuel consumption, enough thrust to get by. But you got to be stealthy. Otherwise, it's shooting fish in a barrel. You have to look like a bad guy airplane in all kinds of ways. So there's some dollars there. If one guy is flying 4 airplanes, there's going to be some level of autonomy in there. And we called it layered autonomy, where takeoff, I don't need the guy at all. I've already done that on lots of airplanes. Push the button and take off. I don't need to help you with that. But when will he intervene? When will he, quote, take the stick or enter the commands? That was all being decided. So while Blue Force Technology was building the airframe, this other company was building the brain for that airplane to, once you got to the merge, do a couple of turns on its own and then end the fight. So that's the AI thing you were talking about. And okay. There was a name for it, the actual computer. And there was all kinds of press about how it beat the best F-16 pilot on the planet and all that kind of, whatever. So that was going on while Red Air was being done. Surely it's being continued for the CCA world in a different form. That's where that came from. It turns out, though, that the Red Air project died.
Why?
All dollars. I mean, it was going to cost triple-digit millions to put a bunch of those airplanes in the field, and it was going to cost more than triple-digit millions to put a whole bunch of CCAs in the field. So it's pay me now or pay me later, but Air Combat Command is still renting private 3rd-gen airplanes or 4th-gen airplanes in some cases as adversaries because for the time being, day to day, it costs less to rent them than own them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's what we're doing. But that airplane got all the way to CDR, critical design review.
Really?
And yep. And that's why. And another Air Force Research Lab project was building a modular airframe. Common engine, common landing gear, common fuel system, common hydraulics, not hydraulics, electronics, electrical flight controls, common core, and you bolt different wings and tails on it for the mission you want.
Mm-hmm.
So that was done. I don't remember the X number of the airplane, but it flew. It was built by General Atomics. So that core existed. The Red Air platform had gone through CDR. And they had built some parts. Interestingly, for the nerdy aero people out there, if you're going to be stealthy, you can't see the motor from the front. So having an intake that hides your motor is really important. And that's why all the stealth airplanes you see have these weird things on the top or on the side and all that. So Blue Force knew that. So, but what's the intake on a bizjet motor? Nothing. Yeah, it's right there. So they knew right up front the technical risk of building that airplane was sticking a funky intake on it. So they, no kidding, hand built the intake, bolted the motor to it, and before CDR had wind tunnel data on the proof that the motor was going to run just fine. Because you think about compressor stalls and distortion and airflow and all that. Before they got it in the wind tunnel, it was all math.
Yeah.
So they got a real intake built and put a real motor on the back of it and lit it up on the ramp and proved at least straight and level and at 0 knots ground speed, everything's fine. So they were way ahead. So those two companies were way ahead of a clean sheet design when they started. And both of them, developed their CCA platforms from those existing projects.
Do you keep an eye on what the Chinese are doing? I mean, you personally, do you look at? You do. What do you think? I mean, this is maybe a question to ask philosophically rather than to try and attempt to use specifics and sort of an actual set of examples. But what do you think the balance and the payoff and the trade-off is between operating and developing and operating these things in a black world where people don't know about them, and operating them in a white world where you can go out and fly them as much as you want, wherever you want, and so on and so forth. I'm just, I look at what has happened in the last 12 months or so with China revealing a number of different designs. Most recently, there's a channel called Millennium 7, which I love. So he's a guy called Gus. He's an aerospace engineer, worked for the Italian Air Force, and he does this open source analysis of these things. Anyway, so his latest video was, the Chinese had their parade a week ago or so, and there was 5 or 6 different CCA designs on display, and so it's interesting that over the last 12 months or so, China has brought out to the world or shown the world these things. The Air Force, by the US Air Force, by contrast, NGAD, whatever that looks like, is still classified. That's been going on for 10 plus years. The proof of concept and the technology demonstrators and all those sorts of things. That's supposed to.
You mean the F-47?
Yeah, F-47. I'm sorry, F-47. And so I'm just curious to know philosophically, as a flight test guy, as somebody working in that space, is it better to keep this stuff and work within the constraints of keeping it black, or is it better actually just to bring it out? And there are going to be some things that you can hide, some things you can deflect, and misinform your opponents about by various means. What is the balance, and what is better than the other?
So, at the risk of not being able to remember what I should be able to remember perfectly as a student of Clausewitz, but the paraphrased quote from Clausewitz is usually remembered along the lines of, "War is nothing but an extension of politics." So, in preparation for war, it is all about the extension of politics. So whether you reveal a project or not is often purely strategic messaging. So, and I think back to World War II, when we dropped the atomic bomb, strategic messaging to Japan was, how many more of these do you want? Because we got lots. We didn't have lots.
Yeah.
But our strategic messaging was, we can do this all day. How many more of these do you want? So I think the decision to reveal or not is all based on what is the strategic messaging campaign at the moment, independent of what you actually can or cannot do. So the fact that the Chinese are parading around a bunch of airframes that look pretty Gucci from a camera angle from far, far away is a far cry different from, can they employ them in a combat scenario in a way that creates overwhelming force? So the question becomes, are they trying to pull a play out of our own playbook, where in the Reagan era, we decided to win the Cold War by outspending and out-revealing the Russians what we could do until we ran our asses into the ground?
Yeah.
It's entirely possible that that's exactly the play that the Chinese are doing, is that we're going to show them everything and we're going to bankrupt those guys. And we got 1 billion people and we're holding trillions of dollars of their debt. And I can pay these guys 10 cents an hour to bolt airplanes together that may or may not ever fly. And they're going to be playing catch up and run themselves in the ground trying. It's entirely possible that's what they're doing. And then every once in a while, we reveal something good. Dude, you think what you got is, but look what I got that you didn't even know was coming.
Yeah.
So to me, it's all about strategic messaging. And at what point does that strategic message have the most impact? And when can you get it's all about how do you change the mind and the decision process of your adversary? And at what point do you pull the trigger to attempt that change? And I think the best example we have of that today is Gaza.
It's who, sorry?
Gaza. Nobody knows how many buildings you have to level in Gaza before Gaza gives up. It's just, and everybody thought it would be a few.
Yeah.
And it's just not turning out that way. And the same thing for Ukraine. How much of Ukraine are you going to have to level before they cry uncle? The Russians thought it would be a building or two.
Yeah.
And it's been 3 years. So in the Cold War part of it, we're back in the Cold War now. It's strategic messaging instead of leveling buildings and Swiss cheesing societies. At what point do you reveal what you have? What do you say about it? How do you let it be known? Do you do it on an air show? Do you do it through a back door? Do you let something leak? Oh my God, our secret got out, but it was actually planted. That's all strategic messaging and well beyond the realm of some young washed up wizzo who is occupying an office at Eglin.
Okay. So young washed up wizzo who occupies an office at Eglin. Give me your thoughts. I think this will be my final question for you, Grace. Give me your thoughts on UAPs. And I'm not talking about, Chinese weather balloons. I'm not talking about drones. I'm not talking about the whole New Jersey thing where there were airliners that have been mistaken for. I'm talking about people from your community who, principally, I think, through the introduction of AESA radar, are seeing these things, detecting them, visually sighting them, in some cases interacting with them through maneuvering. These things that look like orbs have lots of antennas on them, and that's what I'm talking about. That kind of UAP. What's your take on it? Do you have a? I mean, do you pay attention to that? Do you?
I don't give it 1 millisecond of thought. I literally don't, because I guess I've been around technology long enough now to where almost nothing surprises me anymore. That somebody could build something that somebody else didn't know about, and when they figure it out, they're surprised by it. So,
Yeah.
to me, the chance that this is some alien world that has introduced some device onto our planet and we're just now discovering it is so far-fetched, it doesn't get a nanosecond of my attention. Could there be a DARPA project that was kept totally black and then mistakenly was revealed and then scuttled away suddenly? Entirely possible. So I think the only thing true about the entire UAB discussion is you.
Yeah.
It is unidentified. I don't know what the hell it is.
But does it not? I mean, so I'm not a proponent of thinking this could be extraterrestrial technology. I'm sure it's all man-made. Does the idea that it might not be American concern you?
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt that there's things that we don't know about. And some, just like we'll reveal things accidentally, so will they.
Yeah.
So to me, the possibility that there are all kinds of things flying around there that we get surprised by doesn't surprise me, because it's happened a lot in our lifetimes. So what concerns me more is, as a nation, where do we draw the line between something executable and something that's not? Because lying to yourself is the hardest thing to disprove. There's an old saying way back in my flying days that was a spinoff on a Jimmy Buffett song, where the flight lead said, first of all, you have to keep enough SA to know you've lost SA. You can be so clueless that you don't know you're clueless. And secondly, I'll try to remember correctly. It's not what you know. It's not what you don't know. It's what you know that isn't so that gets you. That's what worries me.
Yeah.
You believe it to be true with every core of your body, but you're dead wrong and you don't know it.
Yeah.
So you create this mythology that you can do something and you can't. And it isn't until you're faced with the cold, harsh reality that you cannot, spelled Russia is going to end the Ukrainian war in 3 weeks.
Mm.
They had no clue of the tenacity of the Ukrainians. They had no clue of the passivity of their own fighting force who, wait, they didn't invade us. Why are we dying? They had no clue of the actual condition of their machinery. But they were convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that this was going to be over in minutes.
Yeah.
That's why they're in big trouble. So what worries me as a country is, where do we fall into that same trap? Where do we think that we can execute something? We develop this big war plan, we put through all kinds of games, we go through kinds of simulations, we do kinds of exercises, and we believe if this happens, we'll do that and we'll succeed. When we started lying to ourselves about that is when we're in big trouble.
That's a very philosophically complex question, I suppose, isn't it? Because if you are aware that it can happen and you mustn't allow it to happen, do you not end up at a point where you can't actually believe in any of your own assessments? You can't. I mean, you've got foreign military exploitation, so you can go and find their stuff, play with it, and see if your stuff works against their stuff, and so on and so forth. And you've got what you think are a knowledge of their tactics, and you've got your tactics, and you have all these different things. If you take that to, I suppose, the full extension of its meaning, do you not just end up in a state of paralysis? Do you not end up in a position where actually you don't have confidence in your own assessments of your ability to achieve effect A, B, or C?
And that's the golden part of that guy's comment. You got to have an FSA to know you don't have SA.
Wow.
And somewhere in the spectrum of warfare throughout history, adversaries have believed their assessments that were totally wrong, and it didn't go well.
Yeah.
But you say, what do I worry about? That's what I worry about. Can we build the best airplane one against any nation in the country, in the world? Hands down. Can we train the best aviators that can take a second-class airplane and beat their first-class airplane? No problem. Can we tactically employ weapons in mass formations with command and control? Absolutely. But it goes back to me, if you think about, if you talk to the ground force commanders and they talk about another Clausewitzian principle that defense is the strongest form of war. Mm. In Clausewitzian speak, and even in today's army, they'll tell you similarly, if you want to be the invading force or the offensive force, you've got to be 3-to-1 advantage over the defenders, in either numbers or capability or capacity or whatever. That's to account for your false assessment.
Oh, really?
Well, think about it. If you completely believed your assessment, I only need half as many as they have, and I got it. But the fact that I'm going to go downtown with 3 times as much as I thought I needed,
yeah,
it's to cover my bases.
Do you think so? Going right back to your career, then you think, and we talked about this, the Desert Storm, the 30% attrition rate. Is that an example then of where the assessments were right, in the sense of your ability to go in and get Saddam's forces out of Kuwait and push him back north into the country? So your assessments were correct that you could do that, but because you were building in that margin for error, that's where the 30% figure came from. Is that an example of that then?
Well, I think what was going on at that point was there was a lot of, and this again, super philosophical. Think about the time frame of Desert Storm that, early 1990s. We were literally on the order of 20 years removed from the greatest military failure of our nation's history. And you can argue, was it a military failure or political failure? Whatever. Bottom line is, we did not achieve the strategic objectives that we started out with. And the use of the military did not achieve that strategic objective. So in that case, it was a failure. The military victories along the way were undisputable, but the strategic failure is also undisputable. So the country, the leaders of the country, I didn't talk to them personally, but my sense is the leaders of the country were still, I'll exaggerate a bit, so paranoid about reliving that there was going to be no doubt in the military mind that we were going to crush them like little freaking bugs.
Mm-hmm.
We were not going to go in. I mean, the original Desert, I think it was called Desert Thunder. The Pentagon's planning all the time.
Yeah.
They had plans on top of plans on top of plans. When the whole Iraqi thing started, they went to the shelf and pulled out the plan. Warden jumped on top of it, and they created a new plan, and I think it was called Desert Thunder.
Okay.
And that was like 10% of what we did.
Really?
We piled on 1,000 freaking airplanes.
Yeah.
We brought in, I don't know how many 100,000 Army guys. 200,000 maybe? It was a big number. We brought in 4 carrier battle groups. First time ever, 4 carrier battle groups were employed simultaneously. We came from the Red Sea. We came from Incirlik. We came from the Persian Gulf. We came from Saudi Arabia. Maybe we came from space, don't know. But we built in so much margin into that one that there was no way that the outcome physically wasn't going to be what it was going to be. The doubt was going to be what was the future of Iraq going to be when we declared victory. And it totally surprised me that we left Saddam in place.
Mm-hmm.
Stopping short of taking him out blew my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Because sure enough, 10 years later, we had to go back and finish the job.
Yeah.
Unsurprisingly to most people. But yeah, so fast forward to today. Where are we in our assessment of our ability to project power across the Pacific against a colossal adversary with over 1 billion people who's playing goalie? What I worry about is where are we over or underestimating our ability to do that? I don't worry about their airplanes. I don't worry about their pilots. I don't worry about their missiles. I worry about the strategic decision process that starts and or finishes those kinds of conflicts.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. As an ex-warfighter, I get to think about those things as opposed to employing it and just doing the very little tiny piece that was assigned to me that day.
Yeah.
So
Bruce.
we had a whole discussion in my office not too long ago about why has the Ukraine war lasted as long as it has? And the backseat quarterback in me, it's very obvious. When there's 10,000 Russian dudes lining up on your border, you've kind of already lost. When you let it get to 20, you've kind of already lost. So the armchair quarterback would go, when it got to about 10 or 20, you call up Zelensky and go, dude, congratulations, you're part of NATO. And then Vlad calls and says, dude, whatever you do not let them into NATO. Oh, sorry, dude, I did that yesterday. You didn't know? And none of this would have happened.
Yeah.
But instead, we let 20,000 become 30,000, become 50,000, become 100,000 dudes on the border. And we go, don't.
Yeah. Or what?
And somebody was surprised that these 100,000 dudes all took a step forward at the same time. And the house of cards fell apart very quickly after that. So, yeah, I get philosophical about strategic issues now because I don't have to deal with the minutia of the actual tactical employment.
All right, well, Grease, I am out of time. So I wanted to say thank you so much for all of your time, for taking us through your experiences in Desert Storm as a young striking guy. Your ejection story, as you would expect, been a big hit. And I should say to the audience that Greece does have a tape film from the number 2 in that formation, just going through the process of trying to get it formally released through the Air Force's public affairs system so that everything is above board and legit. If we can get that released, we will come back and do a sort of an addendum where we'll play the video and Greece will talk us through it. I'm sure that it will be a very interesting mini episode that we could do with that, but we'll see if that happens. But to say thank you so much for your time, really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure to have you. And I think generally just doing this, I always feel like there's a certain privilege in being able to sit down and talk to people and to get them to share their experiences. And that's certainly been the feeling I've had when I've been talking to you. So thanks so much, Greece. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for all you do, the storytelling. I mean, like I tell you, I live on my elliptical and I go to YouTube University every day, and I'll flip on 10% True and learn something new. And there's probably, I'm guessing, pushing 100 plus episodes out there, and I haven't seen half of them yet. So I was watching the double MiG kill one yesterday.
Yeah.
And I had no idea. I mean, I'd heard about that mission, but I had no idea that number two's radar was tracking one airplane. It blew up and then jumped down. No clue.
Yeah.
I'd never heard that. Clearly, that's what the radar could have done. So
Yeah.
it wouldn't even occur to me that actually happened in reality in the AIM-7 days. But yeah, so thanks to you for doing that, because we all enjoy those stories. And if you want to entertain the notion of putting Greece on the hot seat for an Ask Me Anything, I'm totally open to that. It'd be kind of cool to see what the community comes up and says. What does Greece think about this?
Yeah. You'd be happy to do a live one.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is just to explain to everybody at home. So my podcast is free. If you don't mind watching some adverts, it's free. If you want to get rid of the adverts, you can pay for the sort of middle tier, which is about $6 a month, £5 a month. And if you're happy to pay a little bit more than that, then you can do private Q&As.
And miss the opportunity to get $10 off on Depends.
But that's fantastic. So yeah, I would definitely put you down for that. And I know that there would be a lot of interest. So that's great. Okay, we'll do that. So in that case, if you're listening to this, you definitely need to subscribe and you definitely need to come along to that.
And your previous video said, and I almost feel bad, but because I actually do want an autographed copy, I'm happy to pay for it. But I'm not going to order your book about the Strike Eagle until I know you physically have one to sign so that you can send it to me. So your video said it'd be released in September, and if it's already September, go get one. I haven't pushed the button yet, but is it
No,
ready?
that's true. No, yes, my video does say that. So when are we recording this? This is This is Friday the 26th of September. This episode will probably go out at the end of October. The books are in transit from the printer. They are due in the UK on the 7th of October. Unfortunate date, but on the 7th of October, that's when they're due in the UK. I think it's going to take a week or two for them to clear customs and to be in my hands, and then they will be shipped out in the order in which they were ordered. So by the time this comes out, they should be in lovely cardboard boxes, which I've bought specially, flying all over the world to the various people that have ordered them. And Greece, I'll send you a copy. You don't have to buy one. I'll send you a copy.
I am way more than happy to support your effort. I mean,
okay, mate. All right. Well,
it really is cool what you're doing, and so the only extra bit I want is the autograph, because then it'll be special to me. So I have when my son was doing a science fair project, it was all about changing the design of propellers. Okay. And we ran across a book totally by accident that was written by the guy who was the chief designer of the what was the name of the airplane went around the world? The Rutan airplane that went around the world, Voyager.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah, he was lead engineer of the Voyager, and he designed propellers.
Wow.
And his story was, when he was working on that project, he wanted to research what's the best kind of propeller for this kind of mission, and he found there was no published good data on how to optimize a propeller design. So he wrote his own book while he did that and published it. And
Wow.
we found it. And we found it. And in the back of the book, he said, he wrote in there that, the community of people that actually understand propellers is very small. So if you have a question, give me a call. And this number was in the back of the book.
No way. No
So,
way.
so I convinced Michael to call him. And this guy spent 2.5 hours on the phone taking Michael through his book, page by page by page. This is what's important. This is what you need to know for your application, blah, blah, blah. So basically taught him, big knowledge, Vulcan mind meld of propeller knowledge from this 80-year-old guy to my son. And then out of the blue, I get another book in the mail. And with a personal note, Michael, it was great talking to you. Good luck on your project.
No way.
Let me know if you have a signed copy of that book.
That's awesome.
So
That's awesome.
So
well, I
will leave that signed copy of your Fear the Night book for Michael in my collection of things I passed down to him.
That's fantastic. Well, we'd have to do some kind of book swap because your ejection story is in my book, and I want to say I went back and changed it before it went to print. I made a last minute change before it went to print. I think I didn't have the chance to put the whole narrative in. I definitely managed to get your name spelled correctly though, which it wasn't originally. So
I spelled Greece wrong. Spelled 2 E's.
Greece. I thought it was geese. Oh man.
No, there's 2 O's in geese.
So we'd have to do a swap. I'll send you 2 copies, and you'll have to send me one back with your signature on it. So
you bet, absolutely.
All right, Greece.
I'll order 2.
That would be appreciated, but totally unnecessary. Hey, look, we could argue about this all night long.
No, I have to go to my sister's and fix her washing machine, so I got to go too.
It's a glamorous life that you lead. I have to go to bed. Greece, again, thanks so much. It really has been a pleasure, a privilege. You've given us a boatload of your time. I appreciate it. I hope it's been a pleasurable and enjoyable experience for you. I think these histories, they're really important to capture. And like I said to you right at the beginning, for me, you've gone through a load of stuff with this, but for me, the really exciting bit was just getting to speak to an F-111 guy who'd been to Desert Storm, and because that, for me, that was evocative. That was, the 16-year-old me listening to that tape, and now I feel like I've known you forever. So thanks so much, and take care.
See you for the next one. Cheers.